This conference will now be recorded.
Alrighty, let's start this class up. Share screen. Boom. Boom. All right. We're now sharing the screen. I'm going to make this quick as possible. I know the first one was a little long. Hopefully this one will be quicker. I'll speak a little bit quicker. It is on a video, so you can go back if something is said too quickly and watch it over again until you understand it. Class 002, class number 2, organization. Organization with a military setting of troops and equipment organized into teams, squads, sections, and platoons. As you saw, the first one was called Theory, basically Combat 101. This one is now about the organization. This is a supplemental document made in Microsoft PowerPoint to guide talking points in the video, meaning you're looking at a PowerPoint slide thing that is going to go through talking points, and you're looking at a video. The video was made with GoToMeetings, which is video conferencing software that I like to use better than Zoom. The video together with the PowerPoint is a complete package, and the second in a series of videos about the basic of infantry things and are best viewed sequentially, but you can view them however you want. And it's definitely just a first thing, getting it all out there. Otherwise, if I tried to make it really pretty, I would never get it out there because it'd take too long. So I'm just putting something out as quick as I can to get the information out because we have upcoming events that people want the information for. Introduction about myself. I was in the U.S. Army. I was infantry for many years. I played airsoft for many years. I worked in airsoft for many years, and then I went to school for business, which included human resources, which is another form of management that I think blends well when you mix half of that with the military. The references we'll be using. So in the first one, I said that the FM7-8 Infantry Rifle Platoon and Squad, aka the Infantryman's Bible, was the best. It is, of course. I think it was updated, around 2007 to the FM 3-21.8, which is the updated version of the same thing, Infantry Rifle Platoon and Squad. It was updated with lessons learned after the GWAT, the Global War on Terror, as far as other things that we would add for consideration. A lot more vehicle dismount stuff and a lot more deeper into the theory and explanations, whereas the 7-8 was more of like a bullet points. The 3-21 went more in depth. For this class, we'll be using the 3-21 more. And then, of course, FMFRP 12-18, the Yuchi-chan Mao Zedong's guerrilla warfare. What's in this class? This class will be broken down into 4 sections: situation, organization, historical data, and then TASKORG and MTO. The first section is a quick review of the TLOs and task condition standard, and a quick review of class 001 with a few additional notes on things, expanding on something I didn't fully discuss in the first class. And then, of course, TLOs, terminal learning objectives. The second section is sort of the meat of this, which is the organization. Organization means troops and equipment, and that is what this class is. So that is the main effort, if you will. And we're going to start with individuals, work our way up to groups, and then the first part of it, we'll give a bottom line up front and talk about everything. Section 3, we'll kind of go into the historical data of the rifle squad in the U.S. Army, how it pertains to size and fire teams, and sort of the politics behind it, so you get a better kind of warm and fuzzy of how we got to where we're at. And then section 4 is going to be very quick, but we're just going to talk about the TASKORG and the MTO, which is the task organization, a graphical description of the troops under someone's command for a specific mission, and then the MTO, which is a modified table or a table of organization and equipment that lists basically the strengths, weaknesses, and composition of a force, and you keep that as sort of a running tally, basically a ledger or a roster. All right. Situation, section 1. Terminal learning objectives. Understand the duties and responsibilities of every role within the infantry rifle platoon and squad. These are the fundamental building blocks and how to make them work together. Understand the dynamics of leadership in the infantry rifle platoon and squad and how it works. And then understand the history of the squad and fire team and their purpose. And these purposes, of course, are on the backdrop of things we learned in class 1, which is basic theory of how everything should work. Understand how individuals form teams, squads, sections, platoons, and companies, how individuals get together to form these groups, and then how to understand how to use or how special teams and attachments are used, and then get a quick definition of a task organ in tow. So the task, you're going to learn all these things, how to use troops, how to manipulate and place troops to get the best bang for your buck out of the personnel you have available. The history of the rifle squad from the world, basically pre-1947, from World War II until the present. And then a few tools for planning the conditions. It's online. If you're having trouble wherever you're at, you can fix it wherever you're at. I don't care. It's on the internet. So this is considered the walk phase. The standards is if you don't understand something, go back over it. If you still don't have understanding of what you're looking at, I don't know, put a question out on the video as a comment, and I will try to answer it if I see it, or someone else probably will. And the standard is you'll understand how people fit into these organizations. So for fundamentals, this is the data we'll be using primarily. The one on the left is FM 3-21.8, which is the manual, field manual for infantry. And it's chapter 1, which is organization, and then it's section 2 primarily, which is the role of the infantry, rifle, platoon, and squad. There are additional sections about different types of platoons and squads that are infantry. There's mechanized infantry. There's other stuff that are not as applicable to airsoft. And basically the rifle stuff more or less works for the other ones. You just have to adjust it based on the factors, the fundamentals, right? And then we'll also pull a little bit from 7-8. All of the organization stuff over in 7-8 is just in an appendix at the back. But it's a quick bullet point list, so it's good if you want to know just exactly what the roles and duties are. So a quick review. Like I said earlier, class 1 was Combat 101, right? The basic theory of how things work. You're thinking of it, I think of it like a chessboard, right? And you're looking at what the chessboard is. That's the combat operating environment. And the fundamentals that are the variables you can use to manipulate or achieve your goal. So your goal, your win condition, is the infantry mission. That's what your goal is within any sort of combat situation. You want to close with, get close to the enemy by means of fire and maneuver, 2 elements of combat power, right? To kill, capture, or force the withdrawal of enemy troops. So you're basically trying to kill enemy or take terrain, right? Seize key terrain. And I think of the environment like a chessboard, the win condition being the infantry mission, the chessboard being the terrain, the combat operating environment, works with fundamentals that you can manipulate. And those are, you're looking at the whole thing through MET-TC, you're looking at it through all the factors that affect it, right? And you're manipulating all the fundamentals, which are like fire, maneuver, leadership, control. Class 2 is about the individuals. Those are the chess pieces on that board and how you want to set them up for success on the battlefield. That's the human element. How these individuals complete the overall mission success, why they're organized like they are, and what's the best way to organize them. So we started with the what and the why, what we're doing, the infantry mission, why, to kill, capture, force withdrawal, or to take terrain. And what are we doing? We're moving by fire maneuver into the enemy. As well as where, which is a combat operating environment. This class is now going to talk about the who. And then future classes will get into the how, we'll get into the actual nitty-gritty. Like I said, combat power. The fundamentals of combat are combat power. Infantry platoons and squads generate combat power by converting potential into action, right? And there are 8 elements in the new 3-21 of combat power. I've made bold the 4 original from 7-8, which is movement, maneuver, fires, protection, and leadership. And they've added in the new documents and theory, mission command, which I think is the same as leadership, just more in depth. Intelligence, like I said, everything is affected by the intelligence you gather or receive. Sustainment was part of protection. Protection used to include sustainment and security, and now it's more focused on just security. So sustainment and protection, leadership, and then information. Information and intelligence, very much the same to me, but we'll go to the next one. Back what I said, the COE, the combat operation environment. The operational environment is where you do what you do. The reason why is the infantry mission. The variables you use to get it done are like mathematical variables that you can manipulate, affect. Those are combat power. You gather, receive information, and use that to make the best decisions possible as a leader. And a leader should be audacious, quick thinking, tactically sound, and timely. You manipulate your chess pieces, which are the individuals, teams, platoons, and squads, using fire and maneuver in order to fix and finish the enemy or take ground. Ultimately, everything is led by leaders based on information you get to complete a mission using fire and maneuver to fix and finish an enemy. Fixing means you fix them in place. You suppress them with fire and maneuver, so that they can't maneuver. And then maneuver being one of their elements of combat power, if you fix them in place, they're stuck and they lose combat power, and then you finish them. You finish the fight. Operational environment definition. The operational environment is the composite of the conditions, circumstances, and influences that affect employment of capabilities and bear on the decisions of the commander. Meaning it's everything around you, both real and perceived, right? The conditions could be wet, could be hills. The circumstances, you got to get this done now. You guys have low morale. The influences, you guys are sad, they're sad. You know, you've got political shit going on there that we're not going to go into as well. So that's what the operational environment is. And then, of course, along with, like I said in the first class, theories and doctrine combined with combat power were sort of the 101. And the theories were air-land battle and unified land warfare, or MDO. And I'm going to go into that in this next slide here and kind of explain a brief of what they are before we kind of get done with this and go on to the actual task at hand, which is organization. So in the 7-8, it was air-land battle, which is the 80s, right? The Cold War. And then around 2001, it became MDO. And then in 2007, it became unified land warfare. And we'll get to that in the next slide, what they all mean. So, like I said, there's a lot of history in this class because I like to know where it's coming from so that we know where it's going and get a more complete, comprehensive view of what we're talking about. I like to start big and work our way into the specifics and have a better base of knowledge so you can better understand the variables and do your shit instead of having to just memorize rote shit and complete it based on bullet points that someone gives you. Because that's a good way to start so you do the right thing. But ultimately, if you want to become someone that is creative and competent, you need to know the theory and the doctrine behind it. But the Army doctrine, U.S. Army, started in the 70s with active defense, and this was basically right after Vietnam. The Army went quickly into Cold War stuff, and they were afraid of the Warsaw Pact, or the Soviets, basically. And TRADOC, which is Training Command, saw two possible futures for conflict: a major armed conflict in Europe with Russia, or a bunch of like light infantry fighting around the world, which is kind of what we got. The latter possibility led to the Rapid Deployment Force, meaning the world becomes more asymmetric, meaning there's no front line anymore. So you have to quickly deploy forces to places, and the Army's been moving towards that with smaller, lighter battle groups, which we'll get into closer to the end with the history. But they had thought of in the 70s that firepower increased so much that a war would be won or lost quickly in the first few massive battles. And they said the U.S. Army must above all else prepare to win the first battle of the next war. So what they did was they moved all their forces closer to the enemy's borders to make a long, strong line. And that was Germany and now Korea. And it became known as forward defense. Of course, it also aggravates an enemy force or a person that we don't have perfect relations with because they now see it looking like we're preparing forces to attack them. So it just ramps up and amps up hostilities and bad vibes. But it was the method of the 70s and 80s. In the 80s, we started doing something called air-land battle. They're basically combining air and land. At the time in the 80s, it was all about mechanized infantry and tanks, and they saw the success of those things in World War II with the Blitzkriegs and the Germans. And so they found that the combination of tanks and helicopters was the primary force, with some air support hitting the back lines and hitting forces that would be the dominant elements of a fight with Russia. So air-land battle was designed to defeat a Soviet Warsaw invasion of Western Europe through a series of mobile defenses and expecting to lose ground with decisive counterattacks to regain that territory using quick-moving mechanized forces. Air-land battle was the overall conceptual framework that formed the basis of the Army's European warfighting doctrine from the 80s well into the late 90s. It emphasized close coordination between land forces active as an aggressively maneuvering defense and air forces attacking rear echelon forces feeding those frontline enemy forces. So the idea is land forces would be like the Bradleys, the mechanized infantry, the Abrams, the tanks, whatever tank you had, whatever armored personnel carriers on the ground, and mobile artillery, and I think the HIMARS started coming in there, which has seen a lot of use in Ukraine, or testing. I don't know what you want to call it. I don't know why, but and then air power being longer range strikes to hit supply depots and logistics in the back to slow down their front forces. It was replaced fully by full spectrum operations in 01. Now in 2001, which is 9/11 year, full spectrum dominance came out, or full spectrum operations, or also known as full spectrum superiority. But the idea is full spectrum, meaning it is more than just tanks and helicopters and some airstrikes. You started adding in other factors that they've seen in the war, like cyber became big, economic forces. You can hit, like people's dams or electrical supplies in places where they produce the vehicles so that they stop producing their war machine. And the goal was to achieve control over all dimensions of the battle space, possessing an overwhelming diversity of resources in such areas as terrestrial, which is land, aerial, maritime, subterranean, extraterrestrial, which is space, not aliens, psychological, and bio or cyber warfare. People at the time also complained of the name, saying it was very imperialistic and overreaching. And that combined with our 80s maneuver in the Cold War, putting all our troops on the front line, made us look very aggressive and first strike capable. And there were some complaints in the news before the news was fully owned by the state. 113, the foundation of unified land operations is built upon initiative, decisive action, Army Corps competencies, and mission command. By generating the four foundations of unified land operations, leaders can achieve strategic success. But you want to seize the initiative, seize terrain, choose the time and place of where to hit when the enemy is not prepared, and remove the enemy's ability to function as a coherent force, and then prevent them from recovering and retaining initiative. Now the next one is actually not even out yet, but they've already begun working towards it, and it's called multi-domain operation. And it is the same as before, it's just more comprehensive in all aspects. I said right there, we are witnessing a dystopia nightmare, but multi-domain operations has a lot of stuff on the YouTube. Look it up. There's a lot of weird, marketing for it and videos that are very cheesy. But the idea is after the global war on terror and COIN, which is counterinsurgency, they want a smarter army and they want a more pervasive army across all fields, not just the military fields. And this includes economic, cyber, food supply, as well as a full quick strike definition of like hitting with air, land, sea, space, hitting satellites. And the idea is a smarter force because the new generation of people are more technologically advanced and online more and more capable of phone stuff. So there's things like they're already using elements from this in Ukraine with the intelligence they're giving to Ukraine with like knowing where enemy forces are because they're using cell phones and tracking electronic stuff with electronic warfare. And there's a bunch to it. I'm not going to get into it, but that's just the basis of what the big Army doctrine is. But for us, for all our intents and purposes, we're going to those combat power elements because that's what affects us directly on the ground, which is fire maneuver, control and sustainability, leadership fed with intelligence, right? All right, let's get into the meat of this. Section 2, organization. We're going to define some terms and symbology, get a brief description of each role as per the Army definition, and then just describe and define the fire team, squad, platoon, and then what the roles of the leaders are and special weapons within that. All right, bottom line up front, BLUF. What you see on the right are symbols. And a military symbology is a military symbol is a graphic representation of a unit, equipment, installation, activity, control measure, or tactical task relevant to military operations that is used for planning or to represent the common operational picture on a map, display, or overlay. That's a lot of word salad, but let's break it down piece by piece. A symbol, it's a military, meaning it's for a military or combat purpose, right? It's a military symbol is a graphic representation, meaning it's a picture, right? You're looking at the right at that picture, and each little thing you have an arrow that's a symbol, and it represents something. What does it represent? If you get into military background, you'll understand more of what all these little things mean, and you're able to read it instead of having to decipher it every time you look at it, and so you can read it better instead of just translate it. But they are representations of a unit, which is like a rifleman or a fire team or a squad. It could be equipment or an installation, which could be like, let's say, a building with power plants or a hospital or, yeah, something like a hospital would be an activity. If you look like an LPOP, which is a listening post observation post, that's kind of an activity as well as a unit. A control measure, something that we talked about in the first class, which was a way for a commander to control the flow of an operation. And so a control measure could be a phase line. That's a graphic. You draw a line across it and say this is phase line or PL blue, right? That means whenever you cross that line, that's a control measure. Or a CCP. You see a circle with a CCP written in it, that is a casualty collection point. So if you look at a map, when you're in the planning stage and you see a CCP drawn there, that means that's where you can gather your casualties to quickly get back in the fight. Or a tactical task relevant to military operations, right? So you'll see big arrows pointing as far as a task, meaning a force is going to move this direction or it's going to hold this position. But for our purposes, if you look on the right, I've drawn mostly units. So starting in the upper left on that picture, you have an R with an arrow pointing. R meaning the symbol for rifleman, or you could do RFLMN, I think. Basically, the word rifleman shortened down to an R. An arrow pointing is a single soldier, and the pointing is pointing the direction that they're facing. And then if you look over to the right, you have a circle with a dash through it. That is a symbol for a fire team. Not seen very often because fire teams very rarely operate independently of a squad. Mostly you'll see the boxes. But that is a symbol for a fire team. Above that is what composes the composition of that fire team, right? And there's a bunch of little arrows, each arrow being a soldier. With the army saying 4 soldiers is a fire team, you look over, 4 soldiers go down, it's a fire team, right? And the little specifics on those arrows, there are individual little symbols, but they're very often for things more important than a fire team member. Like an individual is very rarely going to have their own little symbol. Often they'll just have a circle with their acronym, like a circle with an R in it for a rifleman, or a circle with a GRN in it for Grenadier. But if you look at those symbols, a straight arrow, that's a rifleman. Arrow with a circle on it, that's a Grenadier. Arrow with a single dash through it, that is a medium machine gun, not a light machine gun, a medium, which would be for our purposes a PKM or a M240 machine gun. Although in Russian forces, the PKM seems to act more as a in between an LMG and an MMG. It's more used for a quick suppression as opposed to an M240, which is a medium machine gun, more often used with a tripod with a T&E, which is a traversing and elevation device, so that you can accurately fire a lot further out than airsoft guns shoot. So not really useful for our purposes, but for bigger military things, IRL, you can use a machine gun and almost use it like indirect. Like I think the Australians use their 240s like indirect with plunging fire. But 4 riflemen go down, you got a team. Next one over, you got 2 little circles, 2 little fire teams, and below that is a square with a single dot above it, and that is the symbol for a squad. Now, if you also notice, there's an X through the squad. The X denotes infantry. If there's a single line through it from the lower left to the upper right, that'd be like a scout. Most often, like, you'll also add additional things like an M in there for mechanized, or a little circle in there for mechanized. But there are additional symbols for those that mean different things that are bigger picture that we're not going to realistically use in airsoft and in most situations. So until you're in a command position in a real military, you're not going to see a lot of mechanized things. But a squad is a box with a single dot above it. That single dot represents a squad, right? You go to the right, 4 squads become a platoon. That's the standard for an Army infantry platoon, is 4 squads, right? Oddly enough, the symbol for a platoon is 3 dots, not 4. I don't know. But a single dot is a squad. In between those two is something I don't have here, but is 2 dots would equal a section. A section is usually 2 squads, and then 3 or more squads would be a platoon. Next one over, we go down to the lower left. You have 3 platoons and a 2-dot-1 with a little circle arrow in it. That circle arrow should be facing to the right, not to the top, but it happens. That would be a mortar section. But you have 3 infantry platoons and a mortar section, and then that goes down to a company, or COY is the acronym, right? Or CO, right? COY, company. And I put a few little marks on it. A for A company, Druge for the unit being Drugina. A single line above it is a company. And then, of course, 2 lines is battalion, but we're not going to get to that. To the right of that, you notice different colors. So blue has been all of the units so far. Blue is the color for friendly, kind of like Blue Force Tracker, right? Blue 4, good guys. Green is a neutral or occasionally partner force element, which is why a lot of you hear green on blue a lot, which is like partner forces, especially in Afghanistan, firing on our guys. And then red would be enemy. I have a triangle there at the bottom. A triangle denotes a listening post, observation post, an OP. And if that was blue, it'd be a friendly OP, marking where we put our OPs, or where a commander would want to put our own OPs. And that would be a control measure, or even a unit or activity, right? An OP. And then to the right of that is a diamond. Friendly forces are usually squares. Enemy forces are usually diamond. An enemy squad is a single slash through it. If there's more than a squad, you'll put the 3 dots above it and make it a platoon. But that's what we have for a basic definition of symbology. When you see it on a map, if you see those things, that's what they mean. And then if you see lines across places, those will be phase lines most likely. If you see a cross, that's going to be a TRP, or a target reference point, which is something that artillery use or air support. But most likely that's just a place that, using your OCOCA planning from the first class, right? You're going to say, well, that's key terrain. That's probably where the enemy is going to be. So beforehand in your planning, you're going to put a TRP there so that your support, your artillery, your whatever you have that's supporting you with rounds, will get all the information for that spot, the elevation, the grid, and preload it into their computer, so that if you are being assaulted, you'll say, hey, we're getting hit from TRP 5, and they'll immediately be able to lay down rounds. But we'll get into that in the future classes when we get into the specifics of patrolling and offense operations and defense. So next one down, individual. These are just the shorthand for what the different roles are we're going to cover. R is Rifleman. SDM is Squad Designated Marksman. A lot of people confuse this with DMR, which is Designated Marksman Rifle. That's the specific rifle they use, not their role. Their role is Squad Designated Marksman, which is more or less, we'll explain that in a second, CLS. CLS is more of a special task or a special team, but I consider it a full-blown role, because especially in MilSim West or some MilSim events of Airsoft, that's a key role, is having a medic at the squad level, right? So CLS stands for Combat Lifesaver. In MSW or MilSim West rules, it's called SFR, which is Squad First Responder. GR or GRN is Grenadier. AR is Automatic Rifleman. This started with the BAR in World War II as the Automatic Rifleman, but it has come to be more of a anything that has a larger ammo capacity within your squad to lay down suppressive fire to help you with your, combat power, right? You lay down suppressive fire, that's your fires. That's your suppressive fires to fix them in place and to help you. You should never move without suppressive fires. So that could be, in the U.S. Army doctrine, it's going to be a SAW, right? Squad automatic weapon, which is just an automatic rifle, which is shooting rifle rounds. The next one up is MG, which is machine gun or machine gunner. And that's where you go up to a proper rifle caliber, which is like 308, 7.62, something bigger than a rifle than like 5.56, right? It's going to be a bigger round, so it's going to have a lot longer range. And in certain milsim rules, machine guns will also have an increased feet per second or muzzle velocity, so that they do actually, in reality, have a larger range. And they also have a larger volume of fire because a lot of them are drum fed, as well as ARs should be. And then AG is assistant gunner or A gunner. It's a person that assists the machine gunner. And there's a whole, way to do that where they're very close touching them, and they're the person that does the barrel changes, because in real world, barrels heat up after shooting them, and if you're laying down suppressive fire, you could be changing a barrel every few minutes, right? And that's why they have multiple barrels laid out. And everyone that's a gunner is going to at some point pick it up without touching it with a glove or picking it up by the handle and burn their hand. It happens. And then AB is ammo bearer. It's just basically a person in a machine gun team that's for additional security and carrying of all the ammo that they have to ruck up to some support by fire position, right? So we started off with symbols. That's the bottom line. Then we go to individuals. These are the individuals. From there, we move to buddy teams, aka the Canadian fire team. Why? Because Canadians call their two-man teams fire teams. I don't know. But as soon as you have a buddy team, that is the most basic form of fire maneuver. One person can fire while one maneuvers, and that is the beginning of actual combat power, because then you need a leader. Then you need fire maneuver, right? From there, we move on to a fire team, which is 3 to 6 soldiers, and is defined as a leader and a collection of riflemen or special roles. Special roles being, like we said earlier, SDM, Grenadier, AR, squad first responder, stuff like that. So, individual roles and special roles outside of a rifleman. Then you start doing bounding with buddy teams, and then you hit a fire team, right? Fire team is 3 to 6 soldiers. When you have 2 to 4 fire teams, you have a squad. A squad is the same as a fire. Basically, a squad is your smallest element that can operate by itself, and that's going to be 2 to 4 fire teams, which means, 7 to 15, 7 to 16 people, right? The next one up is a squad, a section. A section's this like middle ground that's mainly used for special groups at the company level, but that's going to be 2 squads, roughly 2 squads of people. The biggest thing you'll see are like fist or like fire support teams or mortars or scouts attached, and those are usually at the company level, which is why whenever you see people asking to be snipers, I always kind of like scoff at it, because that is a company level task. So people trying to be scout or snipers at the, fire team level, I'm like, well, you can do that role, but I'll send you up to company, because company is where they need to develop the battlefield and develop the battle space, and they use scouts and snipers at that level. You don't really, that's where you initiate, platoon attacks with a sniper fire, right? Or well aimed shots. But for our purposes, we don't really use it. And then a platoon is going to be 3 to 5 squads and a leadership team. Remember, at this point up, every group basically had a single leader. A buddy team, someone will have to lead bounding, or they can do it on their own. A fire team's going to have a leader. A squad's going to have a leader leading 2 teams. A section might have a leader, who knows. But a platoon is where you start having a team. You're going to need multiple people leading it, because now you're hitting 30, 40, 50 people, and you're going to need more than one person running everything. From there, you go to company. A company is going to be 3 to 5 of those line platoons with attached sections and a leadership team. The leadership team is going to get even bigger at the company, of course. Here's a few additional graphics from the Army. This is, of course, the Army infantry style. It's a little fuzzy on the right. I probably should have gotten a better picture, but you have a headquarters for the platoon. You have a PL, which is the platoon leader, and RTO attached to him. You have a platoon FO, which kind of calls for fires at at a bigger level, you have a Platoon Sergeant, and then you have a Platoon Medic. The Platoon Medic is the house elf attached to the Platoon Sergeant, and the RTO is the house elf attached to the PL. And then you have 3 rifle squads, and then you have a weapon squad. And we'll kind of get into the composition of those things here in a second. On the left, you have a more specific one. Alpha team and Bravo team. A squad leader leads the 2 teams. And yeah. Now we're going to get into the idea of duties and responsibilities. It's a catchphrase you can use. People that don't really know the fundamentals or just like to sound military will throw stuff out like, yeah, you better watch your duties and responsibilities. Or if they don't know what they're talking about with the train, like, yeah, it's all Met TC, baby. Or they'll say like, you better be watching your task conditions and standards, but realistically, it means what it sounds like. It's basic shit. But we're going to explain what it means here in more specificity. It's a catchphrase. People sound military, in my opinion. But duties and responsibilities, let's go through it. A duty is something you must do by virtue of your position and is a legal or moral obligation. Leaders from platoon sergeant to team leader have 3 types of duties. So there's 3 types of duties. Specified, directed, and implied. Specified duties are those related to your job, and we're about to list those as per the Army doctrine, right? And those are the official duties and responsibilities in your role. Like, this is your job description. That's specified. They're specifically said for that job. Directed duties are not specified, but they are given to you by a superior directly, orally or in writing, meaning you have an operation order. They will say, you're going to do this. That's directed to you. If it's not a specific role that your role already is supposed to be doing, they're like, hey, go, take that hill, or go get 360 security at that assembly area, right? Or create a watch roster for perimeter tonight. Those are directed by a leader for you to do. The next one is implied. Duties often support specified duties, but in some cases they may not be related to the job position. These duties may not be written but implied in the instruction. They're duties that improve the quality of the job and help keep the unit functioning at the optimal level. Most cases, these duties depend on individual initiative, meaning these are things that you should be doing. They're not specified, and you haven't been directed or told to do them by a leader, but they're things you should be doing to be good at your job. In most cases, these duties depend on individual initiative, meaning you should take it upon yourself to do these things. They improve the work environment and motivate soldiers to perform because they want to, not because they have to. So, things like once you get into a proper patrol base, a leader should be walking the line to make sure troops are okay. I mean, they have everything they need, but also they've got their sectors of fire. You're going to each person and be like, all right, a higher leader could go and just do a random check to make sure people know their sectors of fire. They know the timeline. They know how long they're going to be there. They know what to do if they get hit there. Just making sure everyone knows stuff, making sure everyone's fed, has enough sleep, making sure everyone has water, and if not, help like maybe giving them breaks so they can go get water, right? It's basically taking care of your soldiers if you're a leader. And at the individual level, it's making sure you have everything ready so that you have security up, your weapons are in serviceable condition, you're in a good spot with concealment and cover, stuff like that. Or when you lay down at night, before you go to bed, before you rack out, you have a weapon ready next to you, ready to fight with. Maybe you have a set of Crocs, you can quickly throw something on and go fighting. You have a bandolier with your ammo, so you can quickly get up and go fight. And you have a light source near you, right? So you can fight, or your NVGs or night vision so that you can quickly get up. And you're not just like throwing your stuff out. So in the morning, when it's time to pull out, you have to repack your entire ruck. No, everything is an implied duty is that your ruck should be packed, ready to move. So if you have to get up in the middle of the night, you can quickly throw your bag in there and move. Responsibility. So we did duties, now responsibility. Responsibility is being more accountable for what you do or fail to do. Now, NCOs are responsible for what their unit or team that they lead does or fails to do. Now we're going to go through the roles that I just listed. Riflemen are or RFLMN, right? The Rifleman provides the baseline standard for all infantry soldiers and is an integral part of the fire team. The Rifleman is an expert in handling and employing the weapon and placing well-aimed fire on the enemy, which means every soldier should be a rifleman, right? Like the Marines got that right. Every Marine is a rifleman. So when we go back to class 1, I said, what are the duties of a soldier, right? That's what the base of this is, right? Everything should fall under those 4 things: shoot, move, communicate, and survive, right? Or sustain or kill, which means you should be competent at all these things on your own. That's the quiet work you should be doing at home and practicing and bringing so that you're ready as a rifleman. And your goal as a rifleman is employing your weapon and placing well-aimed fire on the enemy. Additionally, you must be an expert on your weapon system, the optics that you're using, any lasers or aiming devices, and should be effective with them day or night, right? That's part of that shoot. Can you shoot your weapon? Do you know what your maximum range is? Do you know how to use all your optics? Do you know how to quickly fix it if there is a malfunction? Do you know how to aim at night? Can you fight at night? You should be capable of engaging all targets with well-aimed shots. I mean, can you aim? Are you good at BB wars? Employ all weapons of the squad as well as common munitions. That's one where if you have you're with a new squad, you should be like, hey, can I look at your weapon for a bit? Just get a little familiar with it in case. In reality, with airsoft, people keep their own weapons, but if someone dies in real world, you can pick it up, especially key weapon systems that are more important. So if you're just a rifleman and someone in your group is down that has, let's say, a shoulder mounted munition, like an SLM, shoulder launch munition, right, or a rocket, you can go pick up that RPG, and if they allow you, you can fire it. Of course, there are real world considerations with airsoft, like, hey, don't do that. My tag launcher, that's $8 for that round. But in reality, if there's a tank coming and one of your guys has a rocket, realistically, they'll probably let you pick it up and try to kill that tank. And if you are familiar with that rocket launching device ahead of time and know where the fire button is, know how to rack it, stuff like that, or if it's a person's like saw, like someone in the squad has a saw in M249, you got to know that it's a different selector switch for fire on that than like an M4. It's a little pylon looking thing that you push left and right, right? And if you've never touched an M249, you can't go get that weapon system back up, that key weapon system. Next one is construct and occupy a hasty firing position and know how to fire from it. You must know how to occupy covered and concealed positions in all environments and what protection they provide from direct fire weapons, and is competent in the performance of these tasks while using night vision devices. That last part is pretty hard. I mean, if you've never used night vision and you just got some for the first time for the event, you rented it or something, you're not going to be as proficient as someone that's used it for a while and maybe it was in their room for a while practicing unpacking their ruck at night in a dark room with their night vision on, or pulling something out of their chest rig that they need to look at a map with night vision. Another thing is the main piece of this is constructing and occupying a hasty firing position, knowing how to fire from it. When you set into the defense, you should know the basic tenets of a defensive position and how to set up your fire. Of course, your leader should also help you and place you in the right spot, give you left and right limits, and make sure that you're set up for success. But as an individual, that's your responsibility to know how to dig into a fighting position, know how to make your own, fighting position or ranger grave or whatever you want to call it. All right. Fight as part of your unit, which includes proficiency in your individual tasks and skills. Like I said, shoot, move, communicate. Those are your individual skills. Do you know how to bound with other people? You know how to shoot, your short range marksmanship, your individual movement technique. And we'll get into those later. But you should know how to fight and know how to bound and know how to move and know how to fire your gun and know how to communicate, right? Shoot, move, communicate. Those are your individual tasks and drills. Know the duties of your teammates and prepare to fill in with their weapons if needed. We'll cover some of what those other duties are in this class. You get a kind of a vague feeling of what the other people are doing. So if you need to cover down, you can. But as well, all of this comes down to talking with your guys beforehand and getting familiar with what their weapons are, what their role is, and then having a leader explain all that at the team and squad and platoon level. Contribute as a member of special teams. These include detainees, search, aid and litter, demolitions, and wire mine breach teams. So special teams are assigned per mission. That is something that you'll say like, okay, you're a fire team. When we hit an objective, we're going to pull one person from this fire team and one from that fire team, and those two together are going to be the EPW search team, which is detainee search, meaning once we get a security up, we're going to pull those two from that squad, and they're going to go around searching enemy for PIR, basically intelligence, maps, radio freaks. There's additional stuff you can look at, like how tread, like in real world, not airsoft, but like what's the tread like on their boots? How prepared do they look? How good is their equipment? How is their logistics set up? How are they fed? Do they look like they're in good spirits, morale? What kind of weapon systems do they have? Are these like a bunch of Iranian machine guns they're getting aided by? You can take out you can take pictures and scan them for biometrics. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but those are something that you will do per mission, not necessarily something you'll put on like an MTO. They'll be assigned before a mission, usually in the briefing at the patrol base, so that everyone can switch around. Especially in airsoft, you want to switch around. Don't want to get stuck doing like, just being security for the entire weekend. That would suck. Um, the next thing would be inform his team leader of everything he hears and sees when in a tactical situation. Obviously, not everything. Don't be full spectrum operation here, but like if you see something that's a problem, you'll give them the hand arm signal of like you hear something like, which is basically a take your weapon and point towards it upside down, or just do like the finger guns with upside down pointing towards it, and that's a symbol for like enemy, right? And we'll get into those, of course, later in patrolling. But tell your leader if you see something, don't just be quiet and let you guys all die, because that would suck. Perform individual preventative medical measures. That's self-aid, right? In real world, that'd be like practicing how to apply your own tourniquet. We won't get into real world medical very much, but individual preventative measure is something that is important. All right. Next one is administer buddy aid. Remember I said self-aid. The next one is buddy aid. That is where you put a TQ on someone. Now, my recommendation for Milsim West, of course, is you use their tourniquet so you don't lose your tourniquet, because everyone gets one, right? If you've gone to a bunch of games and you have like 8 and it's a friend group that you trust, you could also carry multiple TQs and then you can put one on as long as they only get one put on them, right? You can't put multiple on if you carry multiple, but if you lose one, it's good to have a spare in your ruck or something. But performing buddy aid in real world, it all really boils down to, in combat, everything is going to be, most casualties come from massive blood loss, which would be a tourniquet, or a little bit less common would be like some sort of thoracic damage where you'd need to put in a tension pneumothorax. You basically put a little thing in so that the pleural space, the space around the lung, doesn't fill up with fluid, whether it's blood or body juice. And so you'd puncture something in a few ribs down and let it drip out and be all gross. Basically, stopping the bleed, right, is the most important one. That's why everyone should carry multiple tourniquets in real world and in airsoft. But buddy aid is basically putting buddy aid on, and of course there's further stuff you can talk about there with TC3 or tactical combat casualty care. And the idea is, if you're in a fight as a rifleman and someone gets hit, you should try to finish the fight if possible first before you try to apply aid. With airsoft, with how quick it is to get someone back in the fight, if you can drag them out of the fight, well, you have enough suppressive fire to stop the enemy from overrunning you and get them back in the fight quickly, then maybe that is a consideration that you have to make at the time. The next one is, role of a rifleman is manage your food, water, and ammunition during operations. Critical for airsofters, especially 40-hour games, because like if you show up and the only food you brought to an event was a can of chili and you don't even have a can opener, you're going to have a bad time. If your only water source is a single Camelback and it pops and you don't have a alternate water source like a Nalgene bottle in your ruck, even if it's empty, you're going to have a bad time. And if you have to manage your ammo as well during operation. That is critical during certain MILSIM events where they limit ammo, because if you just full auto through all your ammo and you're immediately black on ammo, then as a squad they should in theory cross load and make sure everyone has a little bit of ammo. But if you keep doing that, you're just going to keep draining your squad's ammo supply, and they may stop giving you ammo and you'll just basically go dry and you're fucked, right? So you should be managing your ammo during firing. It's critical so that you don't run out when you need it most. And then be prepared to assume the duties of the automatic rifleman and team leader, which means the automatic rifleman is in theory the most casualty producing weapon of the team, right? And the team leader, if the team leader goes down, someone should be expected to step up, because you always need a leader, because a leader is one of the 4 combat power elements, right? And the other 2 are fire and maneuver. And of course, we'll get into the size of a fire team and how 4 is not optimal later, but you need fire maneuver, so you need people firing, you need people maneuvering, and you need a leader. So if a leader goes down, be prepared to step up and take over. And then you can backwards plan from that. Let's say you're a rifleman and now you're the team leader because the team leader died. Do you have a radio? If you don't have a radio, you can't communicate. You can't. That's one of the main things a rifleman should do, right? An individual soldier: shoot, move, communicate. If you can't communicate and you're not ready to talk at the squad level, that squad is no longer connected to the platoon, and that is a problem. That loses combat power. And then if your fire team loses your automatic rifleman and you have not talked to them and you're not familiar with how to use that rifle, or they're being a chode and they're like, don't touch my gun, it's expensive and I'm full spectrum warrior, then you've lost fire as part of your combat power, right? And part of your basic tenets there. So that is bad. And then the last one is something that is universal to all roles, which is you should understand the mission 2 levels up. Meaning, if you're a team, you should know what your squad is doing and your platoon. The more you know up the chain, the better you can understand what your role is. Because effectively, it all comes up to the commander's intent. And the commander's intent at the company level is fulfilling the commander's intent at the battalion level, or the brigade, or the division, right? All the way up to the corps. So the bigger up, the higher up you understand the mission, the more you can act autonomously, audaciously, timely as a leader at the team level. The next one, Squad Designated Marksman, or SDM. And I'll just read through it. These are the basic bullet points from 3-21.8, right? Where they talk about the individual roles. The Squad Designated Marksman employs an optically enhanced general purpose weapon. He also receives training available within the unit's resources to improve the squad's precision engagement capabilities at short and medium ranges. Meaning, the real difference between a SDM and a rifleman is they have a better optic on their weapon. Their weapon may shoot a little bit further, and they may have a little bit more training in how to shoot further, right? But it's still short and medium ranges. You're not a sniper. You're just a little bit further out you can reach. A rifleman may be assigned as a squad designated marksman. He is chosen for his demonstrated shooting ability, maturity, reliability, good judgment, and experience. Must be able to execute the entire range of individual and collective rifleman tasks within the squad. Meaning you're basically an enhanced rifleman. That's what a squad designated marksman is. The squad designated marksman is not a squad sniper. He is fully integrated member of the rifle squad and provides an improved capability for the rifle squad. He does not operate as a semi-autonomous element on the battlefield as a sniper, nor does he routinely engage charges at extreme ranges common to snipers. Meaning at the company level, you may have individual snipers or sniper teams that you can employ to key spots, but within the squad, a squad designated marksman is just helping the squad out as a squad, rifleman that can shoot a little further. And as I said below, basically enhanced rifleman, useful for longer range as a squad asset. Previous role was called a scout in World War II and a squad attachment. So scouts used to be part of a squad in World War II, and they would just have a rifle with a little bit further range. Of course, everyone had bolts and like slow rifles anyways, so all the rounds were rifle range. So you had super good range anyways, and then adding a like a an optic made it just that much better. If you remember Bandit or Saving Private Ryan, that guy that was attached to that squad that they were the main squad that had a optic, he was not a sniper, he was a scout attached, basically, I believe, within that squad. That is the sort of role they would have. Now, in Soviet organizations after World War II, they kept they sort of have been pioneering the idea of a squad designated marksman with their SVDs, keeping it as part of the squad, very much like we did in World War II. And the Army kind of went away from it for a long while, but they've come back to it now with the whole GWAT time and the realized need of it, especially with Afghanistan and those increased ranges that we've been fighting at. Next one, Combat Lifesaver, CLS. In Milsim West TACSOP, it's called a Squad First Responder, or SFR. They are analogous, right? They are the same. 166. The Combat Lifesaver is a non-medical soldier trained to provide enhanced first aid life-saving procedures beyond the level of self-aid or buddy aid, not intended to take the place of medical personnel. And they can slow deterioration of a wounded soldier, blah, blah, blah. This is stuff that is useful. Pause this and read through it if you are in a real world scenario or you're like a weird potato militiaman watching this video. But like realistically in airsoft, you apply buddy aid, right? And then you can do one level forward. And in Milsim West, you apply the casualty medic bottle. But what a CLS should do, or SFR, is ensure that the squad, CLS bags, and litter are properly packed and stored. If your rule set has litters, use them. I'm against litters for training in a lot of ways because they're pretty dangerous with untrained people, and you can just drop people and fuck them up. You can, even with trained people, get people hurt using litters, especially with the added expedited time crunch, right? People start hurrying and they start messing up. But the logistics of your squad bag, making sure you have enough medic bottles, make sure you have spare TQs if you have them, identifies Class 8, which is medical material shortages to Platoon Medic, basically keeping your CLS bag full of medic bottles, letting your Platoon Medic know when you're short and to get more and how many you've used, provides enhanced first aid for injuries. If your CLS is also real world medical, that's also nice, but life, limb, or eyesight, call a real ambulance. Uses enhanced first aid skills, knows location of the casualty collection point. That is key. Everyone should, but the medic should be working with the squad first responders, the platoon medics, and the company medic so that the casualty collection points all jive together, where you might have a squad, platoon, or company's casualty collection point, making sure that the logistics for the medic bottles or medical support to all of those are set up. So the squad first responder will work with the platoon to set up platoon CCPs and make sure people know where those are. And they're basically the go-between between the platoon medic and the squad. So you do self-aid, which you put your own tourniquet on in real world, but in self-aid, you have none in airsoft. Buddy aid, you call out for buddy aid if you need a tourniquet put on. And then if you have been shot once or twice and you're out of TQs, then you call for a medic, and then the CLS will come and revive you. You're not going to do those medical interventions in real life, but you're still responsible for the medic bag, medic box, and positioning to be helpful based on MET-TC of the situation, OCOC of the terrain, and the commander and squad leader's intent. One per squad per MSW rule set. I suggest personally you put them in the trail team, but obviously it's dependent on the situation. Next one, Grenadier, GR or GRM. The Grenadier is currently equipped with a blah, 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 and attached a 40mm grenade launcher, provides the fire team with a high trajectory and high explosive capability out to 350 meters. This fire enables the team to achieve complementary effects with high trajectory and flat trajectory ball ammunition from the team's weapons, meaning you fire your rifle and you can fire your grenade launcher. The grenade launcher allows the grenade to perform the three functions: suppress and destroy enemy infantry and lightly armored vehicles with HE or high explosive dual purpose, HEDP, provide obscurance to screen and cover a squad's fire maneuver and movement, meaning using smoke grenades within your grenade launcher, and employ illumination rounds to increase the squad's visibility and mark enemy positions. Again, that is probably a cadre only task using flares and flare guns, but there are 40mm rounds that will go up, light up the area with a slowly falling light source, right? And what the Grenadier will do is suppress and destroy the enemy. Suppress is key with that high trajectory that was mentioned earlier, because with high trajectory, you can hit areas that are behind cover if you can arc over them. Areas that are called defilade, right? Areas that are lower, like divots or fighting positions or bunkers, things that are hidden from direct line of sight fire from like BBs, but you can hit through arching rounds in with trajectory. That's a key task of the grenade launcher. Another thing within specifically airsoft is the range of this HE or this tag round or grenade, is that it's going to be much further than an airsoft round. A lot of the CO2 stuff will go to 100 to 150 meters, right? Which is a long ways. And the Grenadier accomplishes all tasks of the Rifleman, right? They're just an enhanced Rifleman with a special role attached. They engage targets with appropriate type of round both day and night, meaning they can take out vehicles, they can hit people in those defilade positions. They can identify the different rounds by shape and color and how to employ each round. In real world, all these different grenade rounds go in the same tube, but they are all different colors and shapes. So like, if you look at one with a blue tip, it's probably going to be full of chalk round, which is a training round, a TPT, right? Or you could know that like the yellow one. Basically, there are different colors. You can look up a diagram of them. It's a very it doesn't really matter for airsoft. For airsoft, you have to identify the different types of tag rounds, because there are ones that are impact and there are ones that are timed, and then there's time ones for different timed rounds. So know your combat load and be able to quickly identify the combat load of others, at least, if it's an impact or a timed one, or if it's like a smoke, right? So just know your weapon system. Know the maximum ranges for each type of target of the grenade launcher. A cool thing that I've seen is people using a laser rangefinder and knowing the range of their rounds so that they can airburst them. That takes a lot of practice. What I recommend, we'll go through training later, but there are P.E.K.K.A rounds that don't explode, and you can use those over and over, and then just keep regassing and practicing on your own until you are competent with your own weapon system. Know the leaf sight increments without seeing the markings. The more you practice, the more you can just know the direction that you're going to angle your rifle to shoot it to hit where you want to hit. And that's just a thing of practice, and it is a perishable skill. Know how to make an adjustment from the first round so a second round hit can be attained. Know how to do Kentucky windage. Again, know your weapon system, practice. Loads grenade launcher quickly in all firing positions and while running. So you have to be proficient with the weapon system. Again, you could practice drills where you're running and loading, where you get behind cover, where you're laying down, where you're crunched up, and you can still put your round in without having to stand up and put it in slowly. Is prepared to assume the duties of the automatic rifleman and team leader, again, the two critical weapon systems of the team, and understand the mission level to level up. Same as the next one. All right, next one up, 1-58 in the 3-21.8 manual FM. The automatic rifleman, or AR. The automatic rifleman's primary weapon is currently the 5.56 M249 light machine gun in America, right? And of course, that's changing even. But it might change back because the new stuff they're going to doesn't have a barrel change or drums. The automatic rifle provides the unit with a high volume of sustained suppressive direct fires or of area targets. Now remember, there are two types of targets. There's point and area. A point is a specific person. An area is sort of suppressing an area where there's you're not going to necessarily be accurate, but you're out to enough range where you're suppressing them. You're keeping their heads down, and you're still going to take casualties, especially if they're bounding. The automatic rifleman employs its weapon system to suppress enemy infantry and bunkers, destroy enemy automatic rifle and AT teams or anti-tank teams, and enable the movement of other teams and squads. He is normally the senior soldier of the fire team and must, meaning senior, because this is the key, like the most casualty producing weapon in the team, this is going to be the next guy down in importance to the team leader, right? And he must be able to accomplish all tasks of the rifleman and grenadier, be able to assume the duties of the team leader and squad leader. Remember, 2 levels up. So if the team leader goes down, he steps up, and the squad leader goes down, he steps up. Be able to engage groups of enemy personnel, thin-skinned vehicles, bunkers, doors, or apertures, and suspected enemy locations, meaning he can engage things. Be able to provide suppressive fire on these targets so his teammates can close with and destroy the enemy. Accomplish the infantry mission. He's the suppressive fire base, the base of fire, right? Be familiar with field expedient firing aids to enhance the effectiveness of his weapon. An example is aiming stakes. So firing aids would be like aiming stakes is one thing you can put out, or you can just tell the person like this is your left and right limit, so they know where their sector of fire is, right? Not really that important, that one. Be able to engage targets from the prone, kneeling, and standing positions with and without night observation devices, and understands the mission 2 levels up. Understand mission 2 levels up, that's everyone, so you're just going to keep seeing that. And engage from the prone, kneeling, standing position. So be good with your weapon system and how to move with it, right? Using if there's a bipod or tripod with it as well. So, to review, we covered the roles of Rifleman, Squad Designated Marksman, Combat Lifesaver, or Squad First Responder, Grenadier, and Automatic Rifleman. So next we're going to group those individuals up into teams, and then we'll start adding leaders. So just one second. All right, I'm gonna. All right, next. The fire team. I drew a little picture there. Generally with the Army, they will just draw circles and have the designation below it or inside of the circle. Of course, they're blue because they're friendly, and that's just a standard rifle fire team in a wedge formation. Often, you'll see the wedge staggered to one side because it has only 4 members, and that's the standard right now for the Army. But I drew 5. So, the fire team. The infantry squad fire team is designed to fight as a team and is the fighting element within the infantry platoon. The infantry platoons and squads succeed or fail based on the actions of their fire teams. The infantry squad fire team is designed, the infantry fire team is designed as a self-contained team. The automatic rifleman provides an internal base of fire, delivering sustained and suppressive small arms fire on area targets. The rifleman provides accurate lethal direct fire for point targets. They're taking out individuals while the automatic rifleman suppresses them. And the rifleman may also be issued SLMs, which are shoulder-launched munitions. And the Grenadier then provides the high explosive indirect fires, indirect meaning not a line of sight, but it's arcing it into defilade positions for both point and area targets. And then the team leader leads them by example. So if you look at the picture, team leader's leading in the front, an automatic rifleman on one side, suppressing, laying down a base of fire. The Grenadier is able to hit people hiding behind things. And then the SFR, the squad first responder, and the SCM are hitting those point targets and taking them out one by one. And note, this is how the Army defines it. We'll revisit this at the end, but it is the smallest element that can operate a task within a squad. The original goal of the team was to give a squad the ability to do both fire and maneuver elements and operate without the need of other squads. Meaning, a fire team cannot operate alone. It is part of a larger squad, but it can operate within the squad alone as an element, either fire, base of fire, or maneuver. And then another example is the Marines have 3 fire teams, and China has 3 fire teams broken into 3-man teams called cells. But this also allows an additional 3rd squad to do something like security, or additional tasks, or an additional maneuver element. We'll cover all of that with the history, but more or less, security should be internal to each fire team, and then fire teams do fire and maneuver. One does fire, one does maneuver. You'll have that assault, support, and security element, three element thing more at the platoon level with platoon level stuff. Now, with the addition of the fire team, you now have an additional role to explain: the fire team leader. Fire team leader, or FTL. When you see it written on an MTO or a TASKORG or something, or some sort of ledger, you may see TL for team leader, and then they'll have broken down into Alpha team, Bravo team, and Charlie team if there are 3. So it'd be ATL, BTL, and then a possible CTL, right? Now on the right, I have the graphic for the Army. It's going to be just the word inside of it, so TL inside of a circle. And then for the Marines, when they do their little markings, they actually have a little arrow inside of it as the team leader. The team leader leads his team members by personal example and has authority over his subordinates and overall responsibility of their actions. Centralized authority enables him to maintain troop discipline and unity and to act decisively. Under the fluid conditions of close combat, he accomplishes assigned missions using initiative without needing constant guidance from higher headquarters. Like we said earlier, because you know your mission and 2 mission levels up, you can act with initiative and decisively without needing guidance and being told where to go. Team leaders should also lead from the front. They're the most aggressive of the leaders up this chain. So they should, depending on the SOP of your unit, the operating way your unit works, they could be the first one into the room, or they could be somewhere in the middle of the team to have control over the other team members. It really depends on how you guys want to do it. Nothing is strict, right? Use the fundamentals. The team leader's position on the battlefield requires immediacy and accuracy in all of his actions, and his fighting leader is a fighting leader, like I said, the fighting leader, who leads by example, leading first, right? That's why he's in the front of the fire team wedge. He is responsible for all his team does or fails to do, and is responsible for the carrying of the team's soldiers, weapons, and equipment. Remember, those are the implied tasks you're doing. You're going and checking on everyone, making sure they've got enough rest or food or they have water, but as well as making sure everyone's keeping their weapons functional and serviceable and up, and making sure that they're doing okay and they're in the right spot at the right time. The team leader during operations is a subject matter expert, or SME, for all the team's weapons and duty positions in all squad battle drills. Leads his team in fire and movement, controls the movement of his team and its rate of and distribution of his fire. So make sure you guys aren't just blowing through their ammo. Employs digital mission command systems available. I don't know. We'll not get into that. Ensures security of the team's area of operations. Security always up. Assists the squad leader as required. So employs digital mission command systems. Maybe that could be like Blue Force Tracker or ATAC for airsoft, or you could have even like a DJI drone system. But realistically, its command systems would be like something like Blue Force Tracker or like ATAC. Is prepared to assume the duties of squad leader and platoon sergeant. Remember, you can be ready to take the position 2 levels up. Enforces field discipline and preventative medical measures. Make sure your fire team aren't out there white lighting everybody or keeping your hidden patrol base well lit with light to tell the enemy where you're at and that you guys are quiet. And making sure preventative medical measures, meaning telling people to change their socks, making sure people at night are changing their t-shirts if they're getting cold because they sweated all day so they don't become a casualty unnecessarily, making sure people are drinking water. Enforces field discipline, like I just said, determines his team's combat load and manages its available classes of supplies required. Making sure if you have a squad first responder or CLS in your team, that they're getting medic bottles so you don't run out, that they're keeping up on that. Making sure that your ammo is spread evenly among your fire team, and then talking to the people that are using too much to tell them to use less or start managing their ammo better, their rate and distribution of fire. And then, of course, understands the mission 2 levels up. You have to understand your team's mission, what your role is, your squad's mission, and your platoon, and ideally your company as well. When maneuvering the team fights using one of 3 techniques. This includes the individual movement techniques, or IMT. This is the lowest level of movement, and that is the buddy team. IMT is where one person is firing and one person is moving. And there are a bunch of stuff to talk about, like I'm up, he sees me, I'm down. One person gets up and does 3 to 5 second rushes. But this is all terrain and situation dependent. A lot of what they train, you don't want to just blindly do. Ideally, you understand how to do those bounding. One person's covering and then one person moves when they can, right? Use the terrain. Don't just needlessly stand up and get mowed down because that's what you thought, and that's the doctrine. But the getting up, bounding quickly to cover, and getting down, that's the individual movement technique. When one person fires and one person moves, that's the buddy team version of that, and that is the lowest level. And then the fire team fire and movement is the same exact thing. The fire team leader controls that, and you can either do it at the squad level where the entire fire team gets up and moves while one fire team covers, or you can do it at the team level where you have individuals one at a time bounding up and the team leader controls it so that they stay on line so that you have maximum combat power facing forward. Also, a team leader can do it where 2 people get up and run forward and 2 people are the base of fire. If you have more, you could even do it in pairs, but with 3. But the idea is the team leader sticks with the automatic rifleman, which is the most casualty producing weapon, so he can control it most directly because it is the most important. And then probably the next team would be controlled by the Grenadier, who's like the third in line for experience. But there are many ways to skin that cat. You can bound as an individual from cover to cover. You can bound in 3 to 5 second rushes, or you can do as much as the situation allows. You can bound two at a time, or a squad at a time, or a fire team at a time. Situation and leadership dependent. Determining a suitable technique is based on the effectiveness of the enemy's fire and available cover and concealment. The more effective the enemy's fire, the lower level of movement. Because the team leader leads his team, he's able to make this assessment firsthand. Other leaders must be sensitive to his decision on movement, meaning you're the one doing it, you get to choose. The point man's always right. You're the one that's got the actionable intel right there. So if the team leader knows the situation, he will determine how to bound everyone. Next position, now that we're at team level, is the machine gun team. Notice how I said earlier the assistant, the A gunner, is right on him. What he's doing that for is so that he can provide a little bit of cover, and also he can feel it, and he knows the weapon system, and he's helping him. And he can quickly, being right there, change his barrel or change his ammo, and so that they are fighting as an individual person, not as 2 people, right? There's a lot to get into with a buddy team, machine gun team, as far as the technique and why they're humping each other. But for now, just know that the machine gun team is a 2-man medium machine gun team comprised of a gunner and an assistant gunner. That's the team. The weapon squad has 2 medium machine gun teams. Of course, this can change based on situation, or METTC. These teams provide the platoon with medium range area suppression at ranges up to 1,100 meters during the day, night, and adverse weather conditions. You can go further than that with a machine gun team using the tripod and the traverse and elevation. And that most likely, though, 1,100 meters is a good rule of thumb for the 240. Clearly, we don't have 240s. Clearly, in airsoft, we don't have 1,100 meters. But a machine gun team will just have to be more dynamic and get up and move more often because they cannot just suppress from far away while you do your entire platoon attack or whatever you're doing. There are a few ways to run a machine gun team. You can have the leader be the gunner or the assistant gunner, depending on how you want to set it up. You can also have the leader be a third person. The ammo bearer is useful for when the team is separate from the others, meaning like a very distant support by fire, and you need like that internal security, meaning they just ruck up there, give you the ammo, and then they face the back. The most boring and the bitch workiest of all jobs, but also necessary. So machine gun teams are 2 men instead of the usual 4 to 6. It's a key weapon system. You can employ them as a asset at the squad level, attach it to a patrol, or at the platoon level. But machine gun teams are useful. Machine gunner. Notice the little symbol, a circle with a line. Regular rifleman is an AG, or assistant gunner, A gunner. And the MG is a machine gunner with that line across. The machine gunner is normally the senior member of the medium machine gun team. During operations, is responsible for his A gunner and all the gun equipment, for putting the gun in and out of action, is the SME on information contained in 3-22.68. When attached to a rifle squad, is the SME or SME for employment of the medium machine gun, and advises the rifle squad leader of the best way to employ the gun team. Enforces field discipline while the gun team is employed tactically. Knows the ballistic effect of his weapon, assists the weapon squad leader, and is prepared to assume his responsibilities, or knows the team and the mission 2 levels up, right? You always want to be able to assume the position 2 levels up and know the mission 2 levels up. And a machine gunner should be the subject matter expert on that machine gun and will often work as a separate team tasked out to patrols, or will work with a support by fire position with the other machine gun teams under the weapon squad. Assistant machine gunner, A gunner, AG. Second member of the gun team, he is prepared to assume the gunner's role if he dies. During operations, the assistant gunner provides supply of ammunition to the gun. He's feeding the ammo in, spots rounds, and reports recommended correction to the gunner. He's looking out there and seeing where the rounds are hitting. and telling him to, adjust his fire. Constantly updates the weapon squad leader on the round count and serviceability. Where the machine gunner is focused on the rounds hitting the target, the A gunner is the one counting the rounds and is in control of these to support ammo for the gun and reloading it, putting in new links of ammo, right? Watches for soldiers to the flanks of the target area between the gun and the target, where the gunner may have blinders on and just killing the target. The spotter and A gunner is going to be looking to the left and right so that if they are providing a very close support by fire on like a building that's being assaulted, he tells them to shift left or right base so he doesn't hit his own troops that are also moving into the building. Immediately consumes role of gunner, the gunner's ammo continues, and knows rolls 2 levels up. Next up, the squad, the infantry rifle squad. Currently in the U.S. Army, there is only one type of infantry squad, and its primary role is a maneuver or base of fire element. While the platoon's task organization maintained, TASKORG, the infantry squad's organization generally remains the same. The infantry squad is a model for all tactical task orgs. It is comprised of 2 fire teams and a squad leader, and that, of course, can change. It can establish a base of fire, providing security for another element, or conducting fire and movement, with one team providing a base of fire while the other team moves to the next position of advantage or onto an objective. The squad leader has 2 subordinate leaders and to lead the 2 teams, freeing him to control the entire squad. This is, of course, on current doctrine. It is not the optimal, and we'll go into what the evidence points to later. Marines have 3 fire teams of 4 Marines each, and a squad leader who is typically a sergeant or a corporal. On 2018, the Marines announced they'd reduced to 12 Marines, probably for personnel, not effectiveness, with 3 fire teams of 3 Marines each, and 2 new positions, an assistant squad leader and a squad systems operator. In 2020, they changed again back to a 15-man team, with assistant automatic riflemen replaced with Grenadiers, and a new addition to the Marine fire team's anti-mechanized infantry. They probably, this is what the current doctrine is. It's not the only way to do things, but the role of the squad is to provide fire and maneuver, right? With that comes a new role, the squad leader. The squad leader directs team leaders and leads by personal example. He's the authority over his subordinates. The squad leader is a senior infantry soldier in the squad, responsible for everything the squad does or fails to do. And of course, like the team leader is responsible for the care of the squad soldiers, weapons, and equipments, and leads the 2 team leaders. And that's how they lead through the team leaders. Like a squad leader does not fight the enemy with his own gun or with his individual soldiers. He fights it with his 2 elements, his fire teams, 2 to 3, right? Should be the SME on all battle and individual drills. The SME on the squad's weapon systems should know all the weapon systems, all the battle drills, know the effects of those weapon systems, know all the control measures that'll be used for indirect fire and tactical movement, like the CCP or the phase lines, know what those all mean to move using them. So this is where you start doing all the command and control stuff. Controls the movement of the squad and the distribution of fire. Fights to close the enemy, completes the infantry mission. So selects the fire team's general locations and temporary sectors of fire, meaning you move the fire teams and tell them where to be. Communicates, and this is also where you start communicating up. Communicates timely and accurate situation reports, or sit reps, situation reports, and status reports up to higher, which is your platoon and company. And so there'll be the salute report, size, activity, location, unit, time, and equipment of the enemy, or assault, the short one. Status to the platoon leader, including your squad's location, your progress on your mission, what the enemy's like, enemy KIA, and your security posture. Status of your ammunition, casualties, and equipment, your ACE report, or adding water, your LACE report. Employs ATAC or Blue Force Tracker. Operates in all environments to include the urban. Conducts troop leading procedures. We'll get into that later. And then if your leadership dies, you can assume 2 levels up. Platoon Sergeant or Platoon Leader, or you can even go up to a First Sergeant if you need to. And then you should understand your mission and the commander's intent 2 levels up, all the way up to company. Basically, the way leaders go, they found that the average human can only realistically manage 3 to 5 variables at once. Multitask up to 3 to 5 variables. And as they go through more variables, they become very less capable. So everything in the infantry is 3 to 5 and up, right? There's 3 to 5 soldiers under a fire team leader. So a fire team is 3 to 6 people, right? A fire team, and then a squad has 2 to 3 fire teams. There's 2 to 3 variables. A platoon has 3 to 4 squads, right? So that way a platoon is managing 3 to 4 things. A company has 3 platoons plus sections, so there's 3 to 5 things they're managing, right? Every leader manages 3 to 5 elements so that they don't get overwhelmed. They found that, we'll go through it in the history, but they found that in other situations, when a squad had no team leaders, they had to manage the entire squad by themselves. They were much less effective at doing many things. Next, infantry weapons squad. The weapons squad provides the primary base of fire for the platoon's maneuver. It is comprised of 2 medium machine gun teams, 2 medium close combat missile system teams, and a weapons squad leader. The idea is to add a squad with heavier capabilities to handle heavier threats than the light infantry, and this changes constantly. You could have 3 machine gun teams and a rocket team if you have that, or based on what personnel you have available. The Marines are now adding anti-mechanized infantry. I'm sure at some point drone warfare will become part of the weapons squad, but right now it's at the company level. Possible additional heavy and weapons squad teams may be placed under the weapons squad. Now the CCMS, the 2-man close combat missile team is comprised of a gunner and an ammunition handler. Currently, the team uses a Javelin weapon system, right? The weapons squad has 2 close combat missile system teams. They provide the platoon with an extremely lethal fire and forget man-portable direct and top attack capability to defeat enemy armored vehicles and destroy fortified positions at up to 2,000 meters. The Javelin is effective, right? Top attack means they hit the top of the tank where there's the least armor, right? So with that becomes a new role, the weapons squad leader, or Weasel. The weapons squad leader leads his teams by personal example. He has complete authority over his subordinates, blah, 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 same as before. The weapons squad leader is usually the senior leader, second only to the platoon sergeant, and performs all of the duties of the rifle squad leader. In addition, the weapons squad leader controls the fires and rate of fire and the control measures for his teams, right? So he sets how fast they're firing so they don't run out before the platoon attack is done. And then he also recommends where to employ those machine gun teams to the PL. The PL ultimately controls the placement of all troops in the platoon because he's the leader. But this is the most senior squad leader, so he tells them, and he knows the weapon, so he knows where to put them. Monitors ammunition expenditure, coordinates directly with PL and placement of these rocket teams to best support killing tanks. Employs mission command systems available, so ATAC, performs the role of PSG as required, conducts his troop leading procedures, understands mission 2 levels up. So to review, a lot of text and no pretty things, so bear with me. First, we covered the individual, the Rifleman, the squad designated Marksman, the combat Lifesaver, the Grenadier, and the automatic Rifleman. Also, the machine gunner and the assistant machine gunner, and then the ammo bearer. Next, we started talking about the different groups. There's a rifle team, a rifle weapon team, machine gun team, a squad, section, and then the leaders, of course, the fire team leader, the machine gunner as the leader, the squad leader, the rifle squad leader, and then the weapon squad leader, right? These and the size of these groups, just to review, a team is 3 to 6 soldiers, a squad is 2 to 4 teams, and then we'll get up to the next level. The infantry rifle platoon. The rifle platoon, the composition and training of the infantry rifle company's 3 rifle platoons, uniquely enabled to conduct missions against conventional and unconventional enemy forces in all types of terrain and climate conditions. Meaning it's unique, it can fight anywhere, do anything, right? The 3 rifle platoons are the dominant movement and maneuver elements. That's the fire and maneuver, right? Those 3 rifle squads are the meat of a platoon. Then you have a headquarters element. Each rifle platoon consists of 3 rifle squads and a weapon squad. The rifle squads consist of the squad leader and some fire teams. It really is dependent, but basically you have around 3 to 4 rifle squads and you'll have a weapons element, a weapons squad. And then you have an element of leadership at the top. Within the weapons squad, you'll have 2 to 3 machine gun teams, maybe 1 or 2 rocket teams. Often in airsoft, we just have the HE that takes out vehicles at the squad level, and so you just get them in the right spot. But if you have the capability or you have portable rockets, someone that has a lot of ammo on them, you can get a rocket team as well and put it in the weapons squad. Other types of infantry platoons, we'll just briefly cover this just because, and then I'm going to go to the next thing. Try not to make this a 5-hour class, right? The mechanized infantry platoon is equipped with 4 BFVs, Bradley fighting vehicles, and is divided into 2 elements, mounted and dismounted. So you have a 3-man team inside of a vehicle, a fighting vehicle, which is like an armored personnel carrier. A Bradley is basically a tracked vehicle with a big turret that can take out semi-armored things. It also has a TOW missile, a tubular launch, optically trapped weapon, wire-guided missile system, TOW, right? And those can take out tanks. In fact, the TOW missiles on the Bradleys in the invasion of Iraq took out more tanks than the tanks did, than the Abrams, because they're faster and they can move quicker. Within a Bradley, you've got around 6 spots. The new ones had 7 with the hell hole, right? Which is a seat that's really uncomfortable and it sucks to get out of, especially if you go underwater. But the mechanized infantry platoon had 4 Bradley fighting vehicles, just like 4 squads, right? And then they had a mounted element, which was the driver, the gunner, and the vehicle commander. And then you had 6 dismounts. The platoon can fight as 2 mutually supporting maneuver elements or as 2 distinct maneuver elements. So you could either have the 2 teams being two Bradleys with their dismounts behind them in tow, or you can dismount all of your guys and then move the Bradleys forward as a support by fire or outer cordon or something, or move through as a support while moving, and then you have your dismounts. 3 9-man rifle squads make up the dismounted element. In the past, it was 4 6-man groups, and then they switched it to 9, and I think it sucks because each squad is in 2 separate vehicles split up, and is very complicated. It sucks. Mechanized infantry include things like master gunners and additional roles, vehicle commanders, gunners, and drivers, and section leaders. You don't really need to know any of that stuff for the purpose of this class, so I will skip it. But master gunners handle everything about the vehicles and gunning and setting up their training and their qualification lanes. NATO defines a platoon, so beyond mechanized, other types, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, defines a platoon or detachment as an organization larger than a section but smaller than a company. Vague. Lots of different militaries in NATO. In the Australian Army, an infantry platoon has 36 soldiers in 3 8-man sections, and a 12-man maneuver supports the section with a lieutenant as a platoon commander and a sergeant as a platoon sergeant, accompanied by a signaler and sometimes a medic. So their full strength is like 36 to 40 people. Again, that's just an example. You can look at that as a different way to do things. The army of the Germans has a platoon is called the Zug, which is the same word for like movement, right? And it consists of a Zug troop or platoon troop, and has 4 to 6 men in 3 squads or groupings, right? And the 3 squads have 8 to 11 men each, and then you have an Oberfeldwebel, which is like a sergeant. A Feldwebel is a sergeant, is in charge of the Zug troop, and they provide support for the platoon leader and acts as a reserve force. So they have around 28 to 39 people in their platoons. The Soviet armed forces was mounted in BTRs, which are armored personnel carriers, or BMPs, infantry fighting vehicles, and they were led by a platoon leader and an assistant platoon leader, and consisted of 3 9-man rifle squads mounted in 3 vehicles. So they have 9-man squads in their armored personnel carriers, and then in both the BMP and BTR squads, the driver and vehicle gunner stayed with the vehicle, and the rest dismounted. And one squad in the platoon would have one of the riflemen armed with a sniper rifle, right? So they had 29. They have a lot smaller platoons, and they still do. In the modern British Army, they've got 27 men and an officer in a platoon. So they have 3 sections of 8 men, so they're calling their squad sections, and an RTO or signaler, a platoon sergeant, and platoon commander. All right, now we're going to go to specific roles. We just talked about the infantry platoon, how it's shaped. We have 3 to 4 line squads and a weapon squad, and then a command element, other groups, and then we go to platoon sergeant, new role. Platoon sergeant is the most experienced NCO and second in charge, accountable for the platoon leader for leadership, discipline, training, and welfare of the platoon soldiers. He sets the example, assists the platoon leader upholding standards and platoon discipline. So he's the one that keeps everyone in tow. He does the discipline. He sets the example. He makes sure the welfare, people are fed, people are watered, the logistics of the platoon, make sure the CCP is set up. His expertise includes tactical maneuver, employment of weapon systems, sustainment, administration, security, accountability, protection, warfighting functions, and soldier care. So they call the platoon sergeant, quote unquote, beans and bullets, right? You're making sure that list right there, tactical maneuver, he knows where to maneuver, although ultimately the platoon leader decides to maneuver, so he can advise him. The employment weapon systems, he knows where to put key weapon systems, of course, without specific guidance or directed orders from the PL, he will put them in place. Sustainment, which is logistics, right? Making sure they have the water sources at the patrol base or whatever. Administration, not functional for us, but like awards and ceremony. Security, he makes sure security is set up. The PL moves them in and does the tactical maneuvers, and then once they get there, the PSG, the platoon sergeant, sets up security, makes sure security is up. Accountability, that's key. The platoon sergeant's always counting for accountability. Whenever you step off or arrive at a location after movement, you always do accountability, especially at night when it's a lot less visibility. And then soldier care, he's caring for them, beans and bullets, making sure everyone's fed, watered, cared for, enough sleep, make sure security is up, make sure you didn't lose anybody, making sure the water source is there, making sure all the key weapon systems are in the right spot, and then giving advice on the maneuver and tactical portion to the platoon leader. The platoon sergeant assumes no formal duties except those prescribed by the platoon leader. However, traditionally the PSG will make sure the platoon is prepared to accomplish their mission, updates the platoon leader on appropriate stuff, prepares to assume the role if the platoon leader goes down, takes charge of elements in the platoon during tactical operations. Often during tactical operations, the PSG will take over the CCP and be further back and manage logistics. Or will take over maybe the support by fire. Monitors the morale, discipline, and health of the platoon. Positions where best needed to help in the engagement, either with the base of fire or the assault element. Receives all the administrative, logistical, and maintenance reports, and rations, water, fuel, and ammunition, like I said, beans and bullets. Ensures soldiers maintain all their equipment, basically maintains a standard across the platoon. Manages combat load. He's taking care of all the ammo, making sure that everyone has ammo and water and medical supplies. Employs ATAC, make sure that higher knows where they're at and doing all that. Accounts for soldiers, equipment, and supplies. Coaches, counsels, and mentors soldiers. Upholds standards. And then, of course, understands mission 2 levels up. Platoon leader, PL. Leads his soldiers by personal examples, responsible for all the platoon does or fails to do. Having complete authority over his subordinates. Enables him maintain unit discipline, unity, and to act decisively. He must be prepared to exercise initiative with his company's commander's intent and without specific guidance for every situation. So the squad leader was the last leader. The next leader up is the platoon leader, which is the first officer leader. And they're basically working with the commander to complete the commander's intent, and they are a tactical leader, and they are setting the example in theory. In theory. They're going to be less experienced over the platoon sergeant, so they will lean on them for expertise and consultation. The platoon leader leads the platoon in supporting the higher headquarters mission, meaning the company mission, and all based on higher commander's intent. They conduct their troop leading procedures. They're the one that decides how to maneuver the squads and the fighting elements. They set up where the base of fire will be. They set the mission, right? The PL does the mission. They plan it with the advice and consultation of the platoon sergeant. They synchronize all the squads. They look ahead to the next move. They're the tactician at the platoon level. They request and synchronize all the assets of the platoon and working with the platoon, supporting assets to the left and right. They use ATAC. They check with the squad leaders, ensuring security is up, although they can often task that to the PSG. They check with the weapon squad leader to make sure that the key weapon systems, the machine guns are in place. They issue these accurate and timely reports up to higher. They make sure that the company knows what's going on with the platoon so that they can plan at the higher level. They are placed most needed for the mission, which is usually in the middle. They assign clear task and purpose to the squads. You're going to do this and this and this. They understand the mission and commander's intent 2 levels up, so they can do, if the commander goes down, they can take over the company or battalion. They receive the status reports from the platoon sergeant and the squad leaders, and then they pass those up to higher. through their RTO. They coordinate and assist in the development of the obstacle plan, which is like in the defense, and they're oversee and responsible for all property. I mean, they sign for everything, and so if something goes missing, they're fucked. The platoon leader works to develop and maintain situational understanding. This is a product of the four elements. The first, the platoon leader attempts to know what is happening in present terms of friendly, enemy, neutral, and terrain. Second, he knows the end state representing the mission accomplishment. Third, determines the critical actions. And finally, he assesses the risk. So the three items they do, or the four items, they have to know what's happening, where all the elements are, the enemy, friendly, and neutral. They have to know the end state, what they want to get done, what the mission is. And then they determine the steps to get there, the actions and the events to get there, which are critical tasks. And then finally, they assess risk throughout it. So it's officer stuff, risk assessments, critical tasks, what's going to be decisive or shaping operations, stuff like that. Next platoon level role is the platoon medic. Combat medics are assigned to the medical platoon and are tasked to support the battalion. Combat medics are allocated blah, blah, blah. The CCP combat medic makes his assessment and administers initial medical care. The infantry platoon combat medic usually locates with or near the platoon sergeant. When the platoon moves on foot, the combat medic positions himself near the platoon sergeant. If the platoon is mounted, the combat medic usually rides in the same vehicle as the platoon sergeant. The infantry platoon combat medic is trained under the supervision of the battalion surgeon, and they can basically assist in the evacuation of sick and wounded personnel. More or less, a lot of this is real world stuff and logistics and elements of control. But a platoon medic is tasked to a platoon, often from a medical unit. For our purposes, a platoon medic is part of a platoon. So we're going to put it on the MTO or the TOE as part of the platoon. They're not an attachment, not a habitual attachment. They are part of the platoon for our purposes. And a platoon medic main goal is to maintain the logistics and supply of medical supplies, which for our supply reasons is medic bottles or tourniquets. So make sure everyone keeps tourniquets, and if they're out, we have spares. Make sure we have a good supply of medic bottles and medic water for the squad level, squad first responders, and is also keeping track of how many enemy and friendly KA we've been having during the missions, just for good metrics. They stick with the platoon sergeant because as soon as combat operations commence, the platoon sergeant will set up the CCP with the medic in the opportune spot to keep people in the fight, but also not lose the CCP. So the platoon medic has to know positioning, has to know the platoon's mission and the commander's intent, so they know where to place that CCP and when and where to move it to maintain initiative and momentum when a force is moving forward or withdrawing back. So they have two real purposes. They manage the CCP, three main purposes. They manage the CCP, and then they manage the logistics and sustainment of keeping supplies of medic bottles and medic supplies for the platoon. And then the third one is they maintain the health of the platoon itself, where they go and they manage and they talk to the different platoon squad first responders so they have enough medic water. They also go around and make sure that people are, sustaining themselves, which is technically a platoon sergeant task, but they both work together. And they will do things like make sure people change their socks, make sure people aren't getting blisters that'll make them combat ineffective in 12 hours, make sure people aren't getting trench foot because they're not changing their socks, make sure people aren't going to bed shivering and wet so that they become a cold weather casualty in about 4 hours, right? They maintain the health, which is part of sustainment, which is conservation of force, which is a key part of combat power. They also conserve the force by keeping them alive with the CCP, and they can be tasked out to individual missions as a medic as well. The next role at the platoon level is the platoon radio telephone operator, or RTO or RTO. The platoon RTO primarily responsible for communication with controlling headquarters, usually the company. He communicates at all times, maintains communication. If communication is lost, the RTO immediately informs the PL or PSG and reestablishes it. They conduct radio checks with hire to make sure that they have that radio communication within SOP of the unit, right? Standard operating procedures in a static. If radio contact cannot be required, he informs his command at the platoon level. Should be an expert in radio procedures and formats, all the reports, calls for fire, medevac requests. We're not going to really do those here. They should be able to be good with all types of expertise on field expedient antennas. There are antennas you can do that are taller, that get better range. There are ones you can do in static position that you can throw over a tree that will exponentially raise your range you can reach out. They should know how their radios work. They should be a subject matter expert on radios, and they should maintain communication with their leadership at the platoon level and attached at the hip to the platoon leader, because the platoon leader has to give information to the company level so that the company level can develop the battle space and make better company level tactical decisions. They should know the frequencies and call signs of everyone in their unit as well as at higher. They should assist with information management, and they should be able to help with all the radio issues that that platoon has at their squad level and below, right? So if there's like a fill, a tactical like cipher that you put on your radios, they should know how to put that fill on people's radios. They should know how to troubleshoot radios at the platoon level. They should have spare batteries. They should always have their radio up, and they should do all the communication to higher so the PL can focus on tactically leading the platoon. They should also determine their combat load prior to operation and manage battery utilization within operations. And they should also have ATAC up and be a subject matter expert on it, a SME. Next one, habitual attachment. Attachments are attached usually at the company level, and habitual means that they are attached habitually, often, always. Something that is pretty standard. Something like a medic from a larger medic unit is attached to the platoons always, right? Or a forward observer for direct fires, or if you have JTAC, if you have close air support from the Air Force. I have a picture of some Italian close combat guys, right? Anyways, fire support team and combat medics are normally what you'll see attached at the company level. I put the platoon medic already at the platoon because we use them anyways. The next one would be a forward observer, or FO. The forward observer, along with his RTO, is the platoon subject matter expert on indirect planning and execution. He advises platoon leadership on the employment and execution of all fire support assets. You can read through this, pause this video if you have to read through it, but the FO is someone that calls for fire and coordinates between your unit on the ground and someone else, whether it's, artillery or even non-organic, non-detached mortars, I guess, or like air support, close air support, or CAS. We're not going to get into it because they're not very useful for us. So, a review. We went over the rifle platoon. A platoon has, a few rifle squads that act as fire maneuver. It has a leadership team that's composed of a platoon leader, a platoon sergeant, and with their two little attachments, the platoon medic and the platoon RTO. And then we talked about habitual attachments like forward observers and JTAC and stuff like that. All right, section 3. Section 3 is called historical data, and this is a why behind what we were just talking about. This is sort of just a background. You can skip ahead if you don't care about how we got to the current squad shape we have now, or what I think about it. But we're going to go through the different key points when they changed what was the Army squad in America, in the United States, right? Basically, we had a World War II squad, and then after World War II, they had an infantry conference and kind of changed it in 1946. And then they had the Korean War, and after the Korean War, they had another change in 1956. And then they did a really huge study in 1961 for the optimum composition of the rifle squad and platoon to see what's actually best. And then in 1964, they did a reorganization called the Road Study, based more on funding and personnel than anything. And then in 1970 to 75, they did another study. And then after Vietnam, that was after Vietnam, basically. And then they did a division restructuring study, which was, again, personnel and money. And then they entered the age of the mechanized infantry, where everyone thought everyone would be mechanized infantry and tanks and combined arms battle. And they did the Army of Excellence study. So to start off, in World War II, this is what the average squad looked like. They're not in that shape, that specific movement formation. That's just a graphical representation of what units were in it. So a squad in World War II in the U.S. Army had a squad leader and an assistant squad leader as leaders. Then they had 2 scouts, which were enhanced optic riflemen. Then they had 5 regular riflemen, which at the time would be M1 Garands, right? I think. I don't know. And the scouts would have some sort of little optic on top. And then they'd have a machine gun team. The machine gun team would have an automatic rifleman, an assistant gunner, and an ammo bearer. And I think at the time it was So 12 total for a squad in World War II. Squad leader, an assistant squad leader, 2 scouts or marksmen basically, a machine gun team, and 5 riflemen for 12 total. After World War II, they had the 1946 Infantry Conference and defined the rifle squad as a group of enlisted men organized as a team, the smallest tactical unit consisting of only as many men as a leader can direct easily on the field. Well, a single leader would have to make ad hoc fire teams at this time as well as in World War II. He would just pull people and say, go do this, right? And there's a lot of good examples of how this worked in, again, Saving Private Ryan, which was, basically they'd say, you 3 go over there, do that maneuver. And that's how you would get fire maneuver at the squad level. And then you'll see it more at the platoon level in something like Band of Brothers if you're big into military videos or shows, where an entire squad would get online on a berm, and that'd be like your base of fire. And then a leader would go and pull an entire squad from somewhere else, and that would be a maneuver element. So in World War II and after 1940s with this squad, they still only had individual tasks being done by entire squads, whether it's a base of fire or a maneuverment. Remember, the 2 biggest things done with combat power is fire and maneuver. Someone's going to lay down a base of fire and someone's going to maneuver. So the 1946 Infantry Conference tried to define what infantry was, and then they recommended that. The infantry rifle squad consists of 9 men, organized with a squad leader, an assistant squad leader, an automatic rifleman, which at the time was a BAR, an assistant gunner, and 5 riflemen. So basically what they did to the World War II squad was they took out the scouts and they took out the ammo bearer. The assistant squad leader was seen to provide a limited capability for the squad to execute fire maneuver by allowing an additional leadership for the squad and allowing for the formation of those ad hoc teams. As I said, in World War II and after, it was squads doing each role. One set a base of fire while the other moved. And then we come up to 1956, the study of infantry rifle squad, ACERS. The ACERS report of 1956 was right after the Korean War, if I'm not mistaken on the dates. And this is where they began the idea of a fire team. They began using the fire team system in order to have a structure for fire maneuver at the lowest level. Remember, the squad is the lowest level we operate at. Fire teams are not meant to operate independently. In 1956, the Army changed the organization significantly. They went from the last group was 9-man squad. They went back up to an 11-man squad, one less than World War II. And they changed the organization of the squad significantly. Now they have a squad leader, 2 fire teams, and each fire team has an automatic rifleman and 3 riflemen. And this formalized the squad and fire team level for fire maneuver, and it is still the accepted standard to this day, although the size of the fire teams continue to fluctuate. Then in 1961, mid-1961, prior to the road changes, they directed a new study called the Optimum Composition of the Rifle Squad and Platoon, or OCRISP, right? I don't know. When the squad consisted of so they did a bunch of tests with a squad with no fire teams, with 2 fire teams, with 3 fire teams, with different amounts in each fire team. And they found that when the squad consisted of a single entity with no 2 fire teams, most squad leaders just arrayed their forces in a linear pattern with no thought to depth or using the strength of the terrain, meaning they used the squad like a single force. Once the squad started having fire teams, mutually supporting fire teams, the squad leaders started deploying them in depth using interlocking fields of fire, meaning they became better warfighters with fire teams instead of using a single group, because they could manage 2 fire teams much easier than 10 individuals, right? The OCRISP study also identified a weakness in the squad composed of fire teams, which still is a problem in our squads to this day, and that is sustainability. because there are a few characteristics of the test that they tested for, which they still test for, and I'll get to in a further slide. But one of those is called sustainability. So sustainability is critical to a rifle squad. Remember, if you do not have a certain number of people, your combat ineffective. And that's something in the planning in an op board, but the fire team composition requires a 10 to 12 man squad, not counting a squad leader, allowing the fire team system to continue after suffering casualties. They found that a squad will be forced to reorganize if losses reduce the squad below 7 or 8 men. Thus, if a squad did not begin operations with 10 to 12 personnel, first contact, you take 1 or 2 casualties, you're combat ineffective as a 2 fire team element, and you have to reorganize into a single squad. And then you could no longer do fire and maneuver. You would only be able to do fire or maneuver, not simultaneously. The evaluations looked at different size squads and fire teams with even and uneven fire team sizes within a squad. So they would have one fire team with 3, 4, 5 people and one with one more, or they'd have even numbers. The evaluators favored the balanced fire team as it allowed a greater capability of squad level fire maneuver, meaning each team could do either a base of fire or the maneuver element. Meaning, if you have an automatic rifleman and a grenadier in both teams, you're much more capable. Depending on the situation, you may not have the team that you want as the base of fire in the position capable of setting up the base of fire, so it's not optimal, and that's what they found. So they found that 2 even fire teams with at least 5 people is optimal, because any less than 8 people in a squad, 7 to 8 people in a squad, and you'll have to go back into a single unit. You can't have 3-man fire teams effectively as bases of fire or as a maneuver element to get anything done. This went on to the 1964 road study, the reorganization of the Army Division, and then it took that fire team, as you saw in the previous one, they had 11, they took it down to 10 total in the road study. This was more based on personnel numbers, not necessarily on effectiveness. After the wars in the 60s, the Army was looking to reduce personnel by shrinking the squad. Funding went to bigger units first, like tanks and helicopters, and the squad was the last one on the finances, right, and manpower. And they went back to what the previous, the OCRIS study, they went back to what that said was not as good, which was a 4-man fire team and a 5-man fire team. Then we hit the IRIS 75 study, which started in the 70s and went to 75. And this was sort of the post-Vietnam thing. It was the most exhaustive and detailed analysis of optimum composition ever conducted. The IRIS sought to determine the optimum squad and platoon level. It looked at infantry squads and different functions. And they used this element called the BIE, or Basic Infantry Element, which is more or less a fire team. And they said that per each BIE, or per each fire team, they would need 1 AR, automatic rifleman, and 1 grenadier. And they found that the optimal size to perform best for light infantry, remember there's different types of infantry, there's mechanized and light. The optimal size for a light infantry fire team was 5 to 7 men. So that's a key thing there. Through exhaustive testing, 5 to 7 is the optimal fire team size for the light infantry stuff that we do. Testing squads of various sizes, 13 did the best, but it was only marginally better than 11. 10 was horrible. So 11 seemed to be the critical number minimum. And because 13 was great, but 11 was also pretty great, they went with 11 because it was cost effective. So 11 won and became the new squad size, which is 2 fire teams of 5 and a squad leader, right? 11 total. The next was the 1978 division restructuring study. This was the first that was after Vietnam to change the force, and it was done in 1978. And the driving force for this study was the divisional level overall didn't care as much about infantry lethality. The 9-man squad came back, basically due to personnel from a smaller squad. They were starting to get into their sort of Cold War status, where they put all their eggs into the tank and combined arms tank and helicopter battles. And so the primary goal of the DRS study was to prepare the U.S. Army to integrate into the force the new weapon systems of the 80s and to optimize their employment. They thought that at this point that the infantry squad could use less men because of the better technology, of the better like, machine guns and grenade launchers at the time. This report also had the caveat, the recommendation for the 9-man squad, with a further recommendation that to achieve a foxhole strength of 9 men, which means if you want this minimum strength of 9, the squad may require 11 because of casualties and sustainability, right? The DRS study did have concerns over the sustainability of the 9-man squad, but had no solutions offered, so they stuck with it. And it was basically a squad leader and 2 4-man fire teams, extremely susceptible to sustainability with minor losses. Next, they went to the Division 86 study, which of course started in 78, and it never became operational because no one liked it, but the goal was to, starting in 78, work towards something that would be achievable by 1986. That's why it's called the Division 86. So as the Army went into the 80s, it got this new weapon system called the M2 Bradley. It was a Bradley fighting vehicle. And this new Doctrine concept called air-land battle, which we described earlier. And the idea was to defeat the Soviets, they're going to have more manpower, and it's all about tanks and armored personnel carriers. So the idea behind airland was a series of mobile defenses followed by decisive counterattack to regain lost territory. So everything had to be super mobile over a large amount of terrain, which meant mechanized everything. So the Division 86 researchers initially focused on the Army heavy armor, tanks, mechanized infantry, and attack helicopters, and they viewed this as the most capable for defeating the Soviets. Most significant was the personnel constraint on the planners, limiting infantry, armor, cavalry, and aviation to 9,000 personnel from a projected 18,000 personnel in the division. Meaning at the same time they're trying to change the force, they also cut numbers and staffing on their, MTOs or their ledgers, right? So this really hurt the rifle squad because they were the last one again to get personnel. And they started off with, they looked at the optimal mechanized infantry squad, which was 9 men because of the Bradley. If you look on the right here at this figure 8, the initial Bradley squad was 9 men. And that was because a Bradley could hold 9 men total. You had the Bradley vehicle crew, which is a Bradley commander, or BC, the Bradley gunner, and the Bradley driver. And they could also pull out their rifles if need be, but that was a vehicle crew. And then in the back, you could hold 6 to 7 technically, right? So their dismounted squad would be a squad leader, an automatic rifleman, Grenadier, and 3 riflemen. And that was the 6-man squad at the time. Now, of course, they did fire maneuver still because they had a vehicle that could be the base of fire. So they still had fire maneuver, and a 9-man squad with a Bradley was actually quite optimized, but they just used the same 9-man number and they put it into light infantry, and it was not great. But then they switched over to the next one, which is the Army of Excellence. Notice how we look at this slide. You see that a 9-man squad was the vehicle crew. You had a 3-man crew and a 6-man dismount. Now, I was a Bradley commander in my time at one point, and I was also a Bradley squad leader dismount, and we did it slightly differently, which I'll show in the next slide, but they called them squishies or crunchies when they got out, and they would operate behind using the vehicle as cover or separately, and they would move a dismount force and a vehicle force. But there would be, like I said earlier, 4 Bradleys in a Bradley platoon. And so each Bradley realistically had 4 Bradley crews, which had anti-tank rockets, tubular launched, optically tracked, wire-guided tow missiles, and then their main gun, their Bushmaster chain guns. And then they had their dismounts. And they would have 6 per squad, 4 squads, right? So what does that equal? Roughly 6 in 1, 2 is 12, 24 dismounts, right? Not a lot. And then we hit the Army of Excellence in 1983. The Army of Excellence study became the new, so in 1983, General Wickham became the new Army Chief of Staff and halted everything the Army 86 study was doing. So that's so remember, 1978, they started the Division 78 study. A lot of people complained about it. And then in 1983, before it was fully completed by 86, they said, we're not doing it anymore, and they nixed it. And he gathered additional input from the Army with the 1983 Army Commanders Conference. And during this conference, everyone complained of a hollow Army, which had all the necessary elements, but lacked the required robust force structure. Like I said earlier, sustainability, you lost people. So they had this new study called the Army of Excellence in 1983. Back with that other force, remember that I talked about the BFV, or Bradley Fighting Vehicle, which is an armored personnel carrier, that entered service in 1981, and that was still the main fighting force for the mechanized infantry. The Army of Excellence study brought back the squad size to 9 total, and so this is how we were doing it when I was in at first. And the Bradley crew had a crew of 3 and a passenger of 6. So the Bradley Rifle Squad increased from 6 to 9, and so what they did was they took a squad and split it between 2 Bradleys. And then if you notice on the graphic, each squad has partial in 2 different groups. And I didn't really like this. It seems like disjointed because you have to basically have an assembly area when you dismount, and you have to quickly regather with groups from another element. But it also gave spots open for like platoon leadership to be in the crew in the vehicles. But if you look at a 9-man crew had a crew split between 2 vehicles, and yeah, confusing to me. But what do I know? I'm just a guy. Also, moving past the Bradley, despite the Bradley being extremely capable in the Iraq invasion, they wanted a smaller thing, which we'll get in the next study, which is objective force. They when they came out with the striker carries 9 dismounts. So perfect for this 9-man squad they've been stuck on for so long, even though studies show it's not great. Moving on from that, right, we had the 83 Army of Excellence study. They went back to the 9-man squad, and it has a lot of different changes, but they're basically at the division level and for mechanized that we don't care about. 1999, General Shinseki began forming the brigade combat teams, right? And at first they were interim, and then they went to full brigade combat teams, and they're BCTs. And they also have heavy brigade combat teams, or HBCTs, which had like all the armored vehicles that we have in them now. Objective force. The force must be capable of defeating any known or projected threat in any environment, will be the basic organization of the Army. He kept the 9-man squad for organization despite the 11 or 12 man being preferred. I liked Shinseki mainly because of his trolling actions in taking the Black Beret away from the Rangers. Very funny. Although the Rangers took it from the tankers had the Black Beret in the 70s. And then the Rangers said, well, we'll just steal the SAS Tan Beret from the Brits. So everything worked out. But I think I met him at college when he was trying to revamp the VA when he moved on to that after the Army. Cool guy. So, to review, this is just a historical review. We started off with World War II, right? 30s, 40s. They had the, let's go back all the way. You had the World War II squad, which had a squad leader, assistant squad leader, 5 riflemen, 2 scouts, and a machine gun team of 3. And then they had the infantry conference, and they moved it down a bit. And then they had the 56 ACERS report, and they realized that squad leaders needed team leaders to do fire and maneuver. And then they did a few more studies. A lot of them involved personnel over combat effectiveness and lack of manpower in a volunteer army, right? So the fire team fluctuated in size, whether they were even, and they finally became entrenched in the idea of 2 fire teams of 4 with a squad leader. I mean, you still have the ability to do fire and maneuver with 2 fire teams, which is good, but studies show that the optimal size of a fire team is still 5 to 6 with at least 2 fire teams. And also the history was that the 9-man squad was more or less based on mechanized infantry studies and kept for personnel restraints. There's a good source of history I linked here, and there's a cool book called Assault Battle Drill in 1955, which is the beginning of the idea of battle drills by a Major General Guy Fry. Additional considerations. Here's just some word salad to add to it. Size is the number of infantrymen. Composition was how those elements are organized for combat. In World War II, the Germans found that if leaders could only really control 3 units and would ignore more than 3, and the Marines took that, and that's why they have 3 fire teams. I've been told that. I'm not sure if that's real, but it sounds cool, so I'm going to say it. The greater number of soldiers allow the squad to continue functioning as it takes casualties, because the evaluative criteria for these are control, flexibility, sustainability, and lethality. You need those fire teams to have better control, and you have better flexibility. You need those key weapon systems for better lethality. That's why you have a Grenadier, and an automatic rifleman in each team. And the key thing that they are lacking with this 4-man fire team is sustainability. If a fire team takes 1 casualty, they are approaching combat, they cannot sustain themselves with a 3-man team as well. If they hit 2, they're combat, what's the word? Combat, whatever. Incapable. We'll use that for now. And then full spectrum operations means they're capable of conducting offensive, defensive, stability, and support operations. Meaning you're going forward and taking ground, you're holding ground. Stability, you're helping with like natural disasters, stuff like that. And support operations, you're supporting a larger mission. And there are, in theory, 5 types of infantry. There's light infantry, mechanized infantry, airborne, air assault, and ranger. The takeaway from this: the squad is the smallest fighting unit that could operate independently. The squad would only be able to provide a base of fire or assault and would have to work with another squad. Or it would ad hoc throw together teams to take on those 2 roles. Remember, everything boils down to fire and maneuver, 2 key components of combat power. After the Korean War, they adopted the fire team so squads to self-sustain and do both fire and maneuver. There's a lot of play between weapon systems and staffing through the testing. And there are only 2 types of squads: rifle squads or weapon squads. And then we went over all the doctrine and SOPs of current and past units. These are guidelines, not necessarily what we have to do. Optimal organization is based using MET-TC towards your infantry mission, maximizing combat power fundamentals, right? Using what you have available. So if you understand the fundamentals, you don't necessarily have to stick to these things that they've used in the past. But I just gave a little history of why they did what they did in the past, and why what we're doing right now is not the greatest, in my opinion. So, my recommendation: given that a squad wants control, sustainability, flexibility, and lethality, I would ideally, for airsoft purposes or milsim purposes, for control, I would like to have a fire team, 2 fire teams, and a squad leader, and a possible assistant squad leader, especially given our ability to operate for 40 hours straight. I like the idea of a second squad leader because they can do SOG duties, Sergeant of the Guard, to maintain control and accountability. For flexibility, I also like an assistant squad leader, but it's not necessary. For lethality, I definitely like the idea of having a LMG in one team and an MMG in another, a Grenadier in both, and then having one combat lifesaver in one group and a squad designated marksman in another. So my ideal 2 to 3 fire teams per squad. I would like to have 1 AR automatic rifleman per team for fire and suppression. I would like to have 5 to 7 men per team. I put 5 as a minimum here, 5 to 6 for sustainability, so you can take casualties and still continue the fight. I would like 1 squad designated marksman per squad. If you have it, 2 would be great. And I would have 1 squad first responder per squad, preferably in the trail team for survivability. If you can have them, I would like 2, but per MSW rules, you can have 1. 1 to 2 blank fire weapons per squad I would recommend, just for that long distance, as well as the cool factor. Makes your videos look better, which is cool. And then 1 spare rifle per squad as a backup, a spare rifle in a ruck somewhere per fire team. I would like per squad as a minimum, and then per fire team would be optimal. Also optimal, all soldiers should try to have dual comm radios so that you can have a squad net, radio net, and then you can also have an additional squad for hire, meaning you should do your role plus 2 levels higher. Well, 2 levels higher is platoon, and platoon should have a platoon and company net. So ideally, everyone has 2 radios. If you're just a rifleman and you have that second radio, you should have that listening on enemy frequencies if possible. That is a goal. Remember, this is not just about squads, but also individual riflemen. Of course, also night fighting capabilities. Everyone should have NVGs, preferably with the ability to do passive aiming, but a laser is fine. I personally hate the idea of lasers in milsim or airsoft. It gives your position away. It's a good tool for a leader to direct fires, but very rarely do people use it like that. Mostly it just seems like a risk. I don't like it. I don't like it blemming nods. I don't like that everyone uses Chinese lasers that are unsafe, but whatever. I think that if possible, leaders can have visible lasers for guiding fires, and then NVGs for night fighting capability, and everyone should learn passive aiming. Everyone should also have TAC with at least one per fire team or squad having SDM and DMR and mesh networks set up so that you can be offensively using electronic warfare to find enemy locations. All right, that's all I have to say for the review of Section 3. Now we're on to Section 4, the TASKORG and the MTO. What's in this is more like company level considerations. I'm going to get through this as quick as possible and just give you a few examples from the real world that I just pulled from the most recent stuff I've been looking at, which is the 2 events I'm going to recently. So, and then one that someone gave me. So we're going to look at in Section 4 company level considerations. The MTO, which is the Modified Table of Organization and Equipment, or the TOE, and that's for squad, platoon, and company level. And then the TASKORG, which is task organization for company and above level planning, mostly for operation orders. A few things first. There is additional reading down there if you want to hit that link for TASKORG. But yeah, general terminology. A military organization, the structuring of armed forces of a state so as to offer such military capability as a national defense policy may require, aka how you place the forces you have to win. An MTO is a modified table of organization and equipment. A task force is a unit of formation created as a temporary grouping for a specific operational purpose. Keyword here is temporary. It should be made for a thing and then die out. It should be a large force. So when you see teams calling themselves task force, it always grinds my gears, but I guess every basic team does it, so that's what that should mean. Then there's, of course, larger ones like Special Operation Task Group or Joint Task Force, but the most basic vanilla one is called Task Force. Everyone's a task force, I guess. I'm a task force. And then the next one is TASKORG. Task organization is the process of allocating available assets to subordinate commanders and establishing their command and support relationship, meaning how the units fit together in a big graphic to show in it like an operation or a planning. First, we'll talk about a company of infantry. As you can see on the graphic I made very well with MS Paint, you got 3 rifle platoons, each has 4 squads and an HQ element. Each one should be around 40 to 50 people. And then you have a mortar section with 2 3-soldier squads, each one having a mortar. And then you have a Raven UAS team according to Doctrine per 3-21 with 2 soldiers operating Raven for intelligence gathering. Then you have a fire support team or FIST and combat medics pulled in. Any other additional augmentations as well, like air defense liaison officers from joint or multinational support agencies, or like non-governmental engineer support, mobility, counter-mobility, survivability, or additional fire support teams or FIST. And then your command head shed will have a company commander, an executive officer, a first sergeant, and then you'll have a supply sergeant and a supply clerk and a supply assistant, and then you have 2 RTOs and a communications non-commissioned officer, right? So quite a few. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You should have 9 people in your head shed at a company level, which is why you always see your company commander stressed out at airsoft games, because it's just them, unless they are smart and have their own priv squad or command element at the company level. Per 3-21.8, the FM Infantry Rifleman and Platoon and Squad, the Infantry Rifle Company of the Infantry Battalion has a headquarters section, 3 rifle platoons, a mortar section, and a Raven unmanned aircraft system UAS team. Habitual attachments to the Infantry Rifle Company include a fire support team and combat medics, and may include elements from the Infantry Weapon Company as well as other elements. The headquarters section provides the company with mission, command, communication, sustainment, and intelligence support. which are all combat power. It consists of the company commander, the executive officer, first sergeant, supply clerk, an assistant, 2 RTOs, and a communication officer, right? The infantry rifle company mortar section provides the commander with responsive, mobile, and lethal indirect fire. The section is part of the company headquarters, and mortars are definitely a combat multiplier for sure. They could be the most combat casualty producing weapon at the company level, right? Getting hit with indirect sucks. And it consists of 2 3-soldier light mortar squads. Each one mans a single 60mm mortar. The senior squad leader also acting as the fire direct center point of contact during split mission. The gunner and ammo bearer complete the crew. And then you talk to fire direction, control, FTC, and other stuff. But we won't get into that because we don't really have an effective mortar out there. The Raven UAS team consists of 2 soldiers who remotely operate the system, a ground control unit, and equipment to review and distribute electro-optical and infrared video information. The commander uses this information to fill intelligence gaps on the ground, for example, within urban or other complex terrain. So you use drones to get additional information, and drones that are thermal or night vision, so you can fill in the gaps from your forward elements to help develop the battlefield to make better decisions to maneuver your rifle platoons. The company can receive augmentation teams by specialty, and we just talked about those. And we integrate them into planning as soon as possible. First things first is a TASKORG. Here's just an example from a TASKORG I have. It's the process of temporarily allocating your forces and determining the command and support relationships in order to set the conditions for achieving this particular mission, a specific mission, right? So when you have an op board for an MSW event, it's 40 hours long, that is the mission. Temporary and specific to the mission, hence big part of op order for specific operations. The principles for a task org is you want to ensure you're doing everything you can to maintain cohesive teams, meaning you're organizing it so they work together well, and you're creating a task organization. You must ensure you do not exceed the ability of a unit to control the subordinate units you have placed. Meaning, a task org is a visual showing how things are organized, and you want to make sure that they are organized so they are cohesive and work together, and no one's overloaded with commanding too many elements so that they become less combat effective. Here's one I did with for one game. It's not perfect, of course. There should be lines drawing a chain of command from the company down. So, of course, I give this one a C rating, but it's good. Here's a few more task orgs made. One on the left was for an event I did in Mexico, and I even listed out all of the squad leaders, and it was a small company. And again, the sticks don't line out to show who is in charge of who, so I give that one a C. Bonus points C plus because I wrote out the squad leaders so they know where they're at and who they're with. To the right is a real task org for a training thing, but it's for the first of the 507th Airborne, and it shows an XO and Command Sergeant Major, and then they have their different S shops which control different elements like personnel or equipment, and then it goes down into the various companies, Alpha Company through HHC, Headquarters and Headquarter Company. And then below that it has all the different platoons, right? So those sticks show where they go, right? And it's called a line wire diagram, but it is a line from the command who they control. Continued, this class just covers the basics. When we go through orders, it gave you a few examples you can look at what went well, what went wrong, and how it's useful. When we go through orders later and in depth for the operation order or op org, I'll cover how to make a proper task org. If you notice, there's a naming convention, and that's the older way. And there's a new way to name. There's a new naming convention out there that we'll cover when I do that class. I like the old way. Either way works. The point of a diagram is to explain information, and if you understand the information, then it works. But the new line naming convention is different. The graphic itself is called a line wire diagram, and it can get very specific to the mission in the task org, even choose who's doing what. A DO and SO could be next to a unit, which is the shaping operation or decisive operation, I believe, and adding key weapon systems. The examples I made were very basic, just you'll need for any game under 400 people, right? Notice in the TASKORG, it's defining who is the decisive and shaping operation. In large scale, specific to a mission, it is vague with the roles. The MTO is going to be specifically who you have and what weapon system they have, very similar to a roster or a ledger. Next, the MTO, the Modified Table of Organization and Equipment. In the Army, there are two types of units, MTO units and TDA. A Table of Organization and Equipment, a TOE or TASKORG, is a document published by the Army and prescribes the organization, staffing, and equipage of units, also used as TOE and T, right? So that's what an MTO is. The prescribes the organization, staffing, and equipping of units. It also provides information on the mission and capabilities of a unit as well as the unit's current status. A general TOE is applicable to a type of units, for example, infantry, rather than a specific infantry unit, like the 3rd Infantry Division. In this way, all units of the same branch follow the same structural guidelines. What the unit is supposed to have on hand and on equipment and personnel. So if there's empty spots, you can delete them, or you can show that empty, meaning you are understaffed. MTO units are operational Army field units like combat support, and combat service support. MTO units are often referred to as line units. So like I'm in a line unit, I'm in an infantry unit, right? TDA is for table of distribution and allowance, and that's for just like bullshit like pack clerks, I guess. I don't know. But it doesn't really affect us. Continued. There's different types of TOEs or tables of organization and equipment. There's a base table or BTO, which is the organizational design document based on current doctrine and available equipment. It shows the basics of a unit structure and their wartime requirements. Then there's an OTO, an objective table, which is updated from the BTO, usually formed within the last year, fully modern document, up to date with current policies and initiatives. And then there's a modified table of organization and equipment. And this modifies a BTO in regard to a specific unit when a unit's needs are substantially different from a BTO. So we use MTOs because we're modifying it, but you could also use a BTO or an OTO, right? Line companies have a clear and coherent hierarchy that make communication and mission command flow downward smoothly. The command team and headquarters mission command structure is replicated in the platoons. A platoon leader and platoon sergeant lead subordinate squads and teams within each platoon. A hierarchy is built to absorb change and allow leaders to adapt to new tasks. When commanders task line units, the impact is minimal because they have all of that. We have that chain of command from a team leader up to a platoon leader, right? And a company commander. So it's a very robust leadership chain within them. TDA does not have that, but they're not based on combat missions. Next, MTO examples. So I showed you a few examples of a TASKORG. Now I'm going to show you a few examples of an MTO. It's a unit, not a mission. Mission specifics are not listed, such as special teams, like enemy prisoner of war, aid and litter, or specific roles, like support by fire or reconnaissance surveillance. Those additional forms procedures will be for specific missions and usually tasked out at like a patrol base for missions. For convoys, there's also specific ones you'll set up, and combat operations like combat patrols, raids, etc. So you won't see those in an MTO. You'll see those for specific missions. The TOE is a table of organized people and their equipment. Any rubric will work that works for you. So if you want to put those in, you can, but they will change so often during an MSW event that you shouldn't, I guess is what I'm saying. But an MTO is a glorified roster. That's what it really means. It just sounds cool. It's a cool buzzword you can use when you say roster, and then it'll get all the kids excited. The military ones are much more specific with things like, well, let's just look at a few examples and can be as vague as boxes for larger units. It's a tool to track soldiers and equipment like a ledger. And in this example, we'll go over some real Army examples. An example I have from a Mexico event, and then an airsoft teams example that I just pulled from this recent game, and then an example I made for this recent game, and then a captain example he made for an airsoft event. That is probably the best one. So we'll do a real world example, which will be right here. So let's see if that looks. Share. screens. Screen 2. Share. Alrighty. So this is an example from just big army, right? How to view an MTO. And you see a description of a thing or a name, and then you have additional things on hand and differences, and it's very about equipment more so than organization is about, because an MTO could be personnel and equipment, right? But where you see on hand or sub, you'll see things on an MTO for the Army for like ASI, which is additional skill identifier, or an MOS. Are they qualified with their MOS? Do they have current PT passing or failure? Right. That's what an MTO is. It's a working list of people achieving certain tasks and certain things about them. It could also have their weapon system, like here's their weapon system. They have an M4 issued and an M9, and they have a gas mask issued and a PVS-14 night vision device. And that's what an MTO will be for the Army. Let's see what other one was supposed to look at. An example from Mexico event. Not that one. Not that one. Well, I don't have it up, but I did one for a Mexico event as well. And we will cover that. Let's look at this one right here. This is a current rifle roster I have, or an MTO made up for an event. Over here in the upper left, you see it says basically the Russian word for TASKORG or MTO, right? And you'll have the role that they have, and you can drop down like a platoon leader or sergeant, their name, what their call sign will be, what squad they're going to be in, what weapon system they have, if they have an alternate weapon, how many grenades they're going to have, if they have NVGs capable, any special equipment they'll have, like thermals or a truck. And then I also add this in for specifically this event, like an arrival time, so we can plan when people get there. And then at the top, you have the basic information like the event, Stavropol, the dates, these dates, location, the unit name, my unit call sign, how many people we have in the unit, how many rifles, how many LMG, how many MMG, right? How many machine guns, how many rifles, how many night vision, how many grenade launchers we have, how many frags we have, how many designated marksman rifles or STMs we have operating, right? So these are all just a way to plan and organize your group. Another thing we'll have is here's another squad within that group or another game. They have an accountability number, so they know how many total they have, which is good. Team role, security and assault and support. You're not really going to set those up in an MTO, so that really shouldn't be there. A subunit role like reconnaissance, surveillance, or aid and litter. Those are also things you wouldn't really set up on an MTO. That would be something for a specific mission. Leadership role, platoon leader, platoon sergeant. Again, those are good things. Like you have ATL, like we talked about, alpha team leader, bravo team leader, and then who's a squad first responder, and then who has a call sign, then their name, their weapon system, if they have MVGs, and if they have any special equipment. So that's fairly okay. Just has a lot of additional roles that wouldn't really be necessary in an MTO. And then the next one I have would be this one right here. So this is the one that the captain made that's going to be more comprehensive and is probably the most correct. If you see they have a forum that they ask questions like what role they want to do or things. And then they have the MTO itself. And they have the person's name, what team they signed up with for organization, what their role is, like their first platoon, platoon sergeant, team leader, CLS, right? And then their call sign they're going to have. And then over here they have the equipment, right? It's an MTO, table of organization and equipment. So what weapon systems they have here: sniper, medium machine gun, light machine gun. If they have FLIR or night vision devices, what their role they volunteered for, so that they can fill them in on the other part, and then their status, like are they in the Facebook group or the Discord group, or have they read the tax op, have they read the op board? Pre-combat check has been done, right? And then over here is the totals. So it shows what equipment they have, blank fire, marksman, what roles they have. There's a platoon sergeant, platoon medic, RTO medic, and then how many squad leaders. and then what their status is if they've joined the Facebook for planning purposes. And then here's some changes. So when you're looking at these different ways of an MTO, this is definitely the most correct. This is probably also second good. This is the one I have rolling, the rolling one as an example as well, right? So these are two good examples, and then I would not look at the other ones as very good because they're a little vague or they have the wrong information in. That doesn't really work for our planning at our level. So I've given you a few reviews, right? We looked at a few examples. We saw, I didn't even find the Mexico one. I almost want to find that and look through it. There we go. We'll look through it right here. Yeah. So here we have it in platoons, organized by platoons. There we go. And we have the platoon. We have the different platoons organized. We have the name of the person. We have their role, which would be Rifleman, Squad Leader, Medic, right? And then we have their uniform, which is what they're wearing, where they're wearing green, Ranger green, Woodland, other stuff. And then we have their group that they are grouped with, agrupación, and a lot of them are with Fuerza and then Equipo or Club, which is weird because these two to me should be the same, but they are not. But this is just another way to do it. If you also notice how this game was organized, you have pelotons, platoons, Conquista, Conquer, Guar. I did the naming convention for this, so that's the four horsemen of the apocalypse. You have Hombre, Conquista, Guerra, and Muerte, right? But the way that they have their squads organized are these like 3 to 6 man squads, which are very weird to me. So they're almost more like fire teams. And it became very difficult for the command and control. So I would have added control measures, but I kind of went with how they do it over there, and we went with it, and it worked. I won't say won, but we did well. So examples, I gave you a real world Army example. I gave you an example that definitely could use some work from a Mexico event that I ran. I gave you an airsoft teams example that had a lot of stuff that was wrong. An example that I made that was basic, and then a camp example that was, of course, perfect with all the right stuff in there, but is also less readable. So to review, the MTO is a good tool to record and keep track of troops and equipment. It's a glorified roster, though. The TASKORG is a visual graphic showing the units under your command in a way to show what their purpose is for a larger mission in an op board, right? These are just tools. If they help you do your job, great. If not, don't use them. Some groups will like to use buzzwords to LARP infantry, and that's fine too, I guess. And I just gave you a bunch of buzzwords in this class you can now throw out. But hopefully you also know the things behind them as well and what they mean. Final review, infantry have always been around. The squad is the smallest operating unit, and it performs fire and maneuver without needing another squad to help. Studies show a squad can't operate with less than 7 to 8 soldiers, and the optimal number is 11 to 13. We covered the different roles: rifle, squad, designated marksman, CLS, Grenadier, automatic rifleman, team leader, machine gunner, squad leader, weapon squad leader, platoon leader, assistant gunner, platoon sergeant, RTO medic, and forward observer. The MTO is a ledger or a roster. The TASKORG is for missions, and it's a graphical control measure. Any questions? Nope. So what I'm going to do is just end this class here and call it good. If you have any questions, put them in the comments. Like, subscribe, follow my Instagram. Boom.